Chapter 2730. He had mastered most of the words of the heavenly book. If he recited them all, he believed he could cover all the words in the heavenly prison. Time was running out. He immediately recited the words of the heavenly book he had mastered throughout his life. Tens of thousands of words were recited in a short time. Then, Suyu grabbed a handful of moonlight and threw it forward. He heaved a sigh of relief when all the words of the heavenly book in front of him were expelled. Not a single one was left. Han Xian was dumbfounded. How was this possible? This was the heavenly prison seal that the Martial Path Temple was most proud of. He had invited countless grandmasters to try to break it. However, none of them had ever succeeded. What about Suyu? He broke through it so easily? What did he do? Han Xian knew that Suyu was a very special man who could not be judged by common sense. Therefore, after so many years, she had already raised Suyu's ability by several levels in her heart. However, she only knew after seeing him with her own eyes. She had underestimated Suyu. The fact that the heavenly prison seal that the Martial Path Temple was proud of was easily broken was the best proof. Suyu undid the seal and immediately came to the cross. He checked the soul steel nail to make sure there were no traps. Then, he reached out and tried to pull the steel nail out. However, as soon as he grabbed it, a sharp pain spread from his palm to his whole body. The death abyss was about to fall into a coma under the effect of the steel nail. Sensing a strange movement in front of him, he opened his eyes with difficulty. Seeing that it was Suyu, he was shocked. "Suyu? Why are you here?" Suyu smiled calmly. "I still can't leave you alone." The Soul Dominator had not only given him pointers, but also saved his life at a critical moment. Now, he could not bear to abandon them. However, this steel nail was extremely tricky, so you had to withdraw his hand after touching it. Otherwise, even his soul would be hurt. This was when he was wearing the Soul Emperor robe. If not for that, Suyu's soul would probably have been knocked unconscious by that touch just now. "Don't worry about me. Go quickly," the Soul Dominator said hurriedly. "This place is not for you." Having seen the power of the Martial Path Temple, the Soul Dominator hurried him. Suyu stared at the steel nail, lost in thought. Did he have to use the power of the sacred mortal body? At this moment, Han Xian ran over and said hurriedly, "The martial arts temple will know about the changes here soon." Time was of the essence. The Soul Dominator said anxiously, "Hurry up and leave. Don't drag you down because of us." His heart was incomparably moved, and waves of warmth flowed through him. He had been by Suyu's side for many years, even though he was unconscious most of the time. However, he would occasionally sober up and observe Suyu's actions. He realized that this person was ancient god Nine Dragon's successor. However, he couldn't be disgusted at all. In terms of character, he was impeccable. Thus, he had never harbored any malice toward the successor of ancient god Nine Dragon. Even now, the other party's temperament was still the same. He had actually come to rescue him for the sake of a small favor that he felt was unimportant. One could imagine how moved he was. "Ruler, we don't have much time left. Please give me some pointers on how to remove this soul steel nail," Suyu said. In terms of the Soul Dao, he was naturally inferior to the Soul Dominator. The Soul Dominator gazed at Suyu deeply. If he didn't let Suyu save him, he wouldn't give up. Even if he had to take greater risks in the future, he would still choose to try. With your soul attainments, you can't pull it out for the time being. The Soul Dominator seemed to have made up his mind. He looked at the Soul Dominator's bloodline on Hong Yang's neck and said, "If you don't mind, you can refine my Soul Dominator's bloodline and raise your soul realm to the Yuan level." "What? Absorb the Soul Dominator's bloodline? Wouldn't he become a Soul Dominator in that way?" Suyu certainly wouldn't mind. He was even willing. How could he dislike a Yuan level that could raise another domain to its peak state? "Can I make it in time?" Suyu frowned. He had spent a whole year refining the space domain's bloodline. He didn't have a year's worth of time now. "If you are alone, you might not be able to do it, but with me here, you have enough time," the Soul Dominator said. Suyu's eyes lit up. Without further ado, he came to Hong Yang and said, "Excuse me." Hong Yang was so weak that she couldn't even open her eyes. She had no idea what was happening in the outside world. Suyu took out the Soul Dominator's bloodline on her neck. Hong Yang's body and soul immediately faded away. Suyu's eyes changed slightly. He had to save her immediately. Otherwise, without the protection of the Soul Dominator's bloodline, she would dissipate immediately. He got the Soul Dominator's bloodline and immediately sat down cross-legged in front of the Soul Dominator and began refining it on the spot. His personal refining speed was very slow. The Soul Dominator's bloodline couldn't be integrated into his body in a short time. At that moment, the Soul Dominator's eyes shot out two beams of blazing white light, shining on Suyu's body. Suddenly, the Soul Dominator's bloodline, like swallows returning to their nest, took the initiative to integrate into Suyu's body. It quickly merged with Suyu's own soul domain. After the two merged, his soul domain continued to rise at an alarming rate. In just half a cup of tea's time, he successfully broke through to the Yuan level. At that moment, Suyu's body exuded endless soul energy. He opened his eyes and glanced around. Everything he saw in his field of vision was like a completely different person. Moreover, there was a vague feeling of looking down on all the creatures of the world and grasping the pinnacle of the supreme heavenly law. With a sweep of his eyes, he easily penetrated the half-real world and saw things that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Even the abyss outside the domain could be seen more clearly. Some particularly terrifying existences could feel it more clearly. "What is that place?" Suyu whispered softly. He had already felt it when the Space Yuan level domain was completed. Now he felt it again. However, time was of the essence. There was no time to think. Suyu held the steel nail in his palm. Waves of tingling pain came again. However, compared to before, the tingling at this moment was only limited to the palm. It didn't affect his entire soul. This was because his soul domain had become strong enough to be on the same level as the Martial Path Temple, coupled with the defense of the Soul Emperor Robe. Therefore, it was difficult for the opponent's secret soul technique to hurt him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Suyu pulled hard. The soul steel nail was immediately removed. The Soul Dominator fell from the cross, powerlessly. Then it was Hong Yang. He rescued two people. Suyu looked at the descendants of the other rulers on the crosses. With a thought, he quickly plucked out all the soul steel nails from their bodies and rescued them. After all of them were rescued, Suyu looked at Han Xian, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Han Xian, come with me." Chapter 2731. Not only had Han Xian provided the information, but she had also fought personally in the end. There was no guarantee that the martial arts temple would not notice. Han Xuan's heart thumped. Although she understood that Suyu's "follow me" at this moment was not what he had in mind. However, he still couldn't help but feel excited. She was about to nod in agreement, but after thinking for a moment, she said, "You go first, I'll look for you later." She took out a space communication jade artifact and passed it to Suyu. "I want to bid farewell to senior brother Wu Shuang." The people of the martial arts temple were too cold. She wanted to persuade Zhan Wu Shuang to leave with her. "All right, be careful, and remember to leave as soon as possible. Don't delay any longer, or else it will be very dangerous," Suyu said. With the character of the Martial Path Temple, once they find out that Han Xian is helping them, they will definitely kill them. The consequences could be imagined. Han Xian nodded her head. She immediately put on the invisible Dao artifact and went to look for Zhan Wu Shuang. Suyu led the crowd and left quickly. He used the same trick again, using one thought to become real, and swaggered out of the exit. Regardless of whether it was the guards at the entrance of the main hall or the hidden experts nearby, none of them noticed it at all. He had successfully left the half-truth world. Suyu immediately led them to a safe place to hide. In an underground ruin, Suyu released the Soul Dominator and Hong Yang. He clapped his palms together, and a soul ripple attached to the Soul Dominator and Matchmaker. In this way, the martial arts temple would not be able to track the two of them. The Soul Dominator took a deep breath, stood up with great difficulty, and bowed deeply to Suyu. "Mr. Su, thank you for saving me and Hong Yang's lives." Suyu sighed and said, "You don't have to be so courteous with me. We've experienced so much together, so it could be considered fate, starting with the bronze plate. So they knew each other. The Soul Dominator had been hiding its existence. However, Suyu's growth had been witnessed by the Soul Dominator. The Soul Dominator's eyes were filled with deep emotions as he stared at Suyu and murmured, "I never thought that such a puny human would one day become my savior." To be exact, he had never thought that Suyu would be able to reach this stage. When she first met Suyu, Suyu was just a small martial artist. In his eyes, they were probably not even comparable to ants. But after 200 years, that ant had already grown into a mighty existence that could look down on the starry skies, able to face off against the 8 sovereigns and laugh proudly at the sacred mountain. He was even indebted to her for saving him. "You're exaggerating. We're just friends." As Suyu spoke, he immediately imbued Hong Nyang with his soul energy to replenish her dissipating body. However, the soul strength he poured into her could only delay the dissipation of Matchmaker. It was impossible for him to keep on instilling. Sooner or later, Hong Yang would disappear from this world. "I'm sorry. I took away the bloodline that could have sustained her soul," Suyu said. The Soul Dominator shook his head and sighed. "How can I blame you? Without your help, she and I wouldn't have lasted more than a month. Besides, even without the Soul Dominator bloodline, I have other ways." The Soul Dominator said, "I want to head to the Tao Abyss and use its water to reconstruct our bodies." Their bodies had long since been scattered. Hong Yang's cultivation level was mediocre, and any body that he casually created could contain her soul. However, the Soul Dominator's soul was simply too powerful. It was impossible for the body he had molded to contain it. Once the soul entered, it would immediately cause the body to explode. Suyu's heart moved. If Yun Yazi's soul recovered, it would also be exceptionally powerful. At that time, an ordinary body wouldn't be enough. He should also consider getting some water from the Tao Abyss for Yun Yazi. "Do you need me to accompany you there?" Suyu asked. The Soul Dominator was silent for a long time, then shook his head slightly. "You'd better not." Suyu thought for a moment. "Is it because I have the bloodline of the 2 masters that those in the Tao Abyss dislike me?" However, to his surprise, the Soul Dominator stared at Suyu with a complicated look and said, "No, it's because you are the descendant of the ancient god Julong." "How could that be?" According to the words of the Time Dominator and the Space Dominator, they were enemies with the horrible beings in the Tao Abyss. Could it be that the ancient god Julong and the beings in the Tao Abyss were also enemies? So you ask why? The Soul Dominator pointed in the direction of the Tao Abyss and said, "If I say it, the beings there will definitely sense it. If I go there, I won't be able to get away with it." Hearing this, Suyu didn't make things difficult for him. He sighed softly and said, "It's okay, just go." However, Suyu's heart was now filled with confusion. Who was in the Tao Abyss? Why were they hostile to him because of his identity as the descendant of the ancient god Julong? Were they the ones who caused the disappearance of the ancient god Julong in the Tao Abyss? Unfortunately, the Soul Dominator was under the control of others and couldn't answer. The Soul Dominator was slightly apologetic. He took out a puppet made of souls and handed it to Suyu. "What is this?" Suyu was puzzled. The Soul Dominator said in a hoarse voice, "The thing that the martial arts temple wants the most. A bronze plate?" However, that wasn't it. This was just a puppet refined from a soul. "Do you remember the one thought to become real that I taught you?" The Soul Dominator asked. Suyu nodded. "Of course I do." The Soul Dominator said, "Why don't you use the one thought to become real to imitate this puppet?" Now that Suyu had reached the Yuan level, he could imitate almost anything. It shouldn't be difficult to imitate a mere puppet. However, when Suyu tried to imitate it, he found that what he imitated turned out to be a bronze plate. Suyu was stunned and puzzled. This was the first time this had happened to him. He had imitated a puppet, but what appeared in the end was a bronze plate. The Soul Dominator stared at the puppet and sighed. "This is the 10th birthday present I prepared for my son at the Martial Arts Temple. As long as the Martial Arts Temple can learn my one thought to become real one day, they will get the real bronze plate. However, he couldn't wait to attack me before he could learn this secret." Suyu's heart thumped. "So, The Soul Dominator imparted the one thought to become real to Su Yu with the intention of giving him the real bronze plate. The bronze plate came from the Tao Abyss. There are many secrets in it that I haven't studied thoroughly until now, the Soul Dominator said. The Soul Dominator said, one of them includes using the bronze plate to rescue the people in the sinkhole. What? Su Yu was shocked. The secret of rescuing Xie Xiaoye was in the bronze plate? He bowed and said gratefully, Senior, I will always remember your great kindness. The Soul Dominator laughed in a hoarse voice. You have done me a great favor. You don't have to be so polite. He helped Hong Yang up. The martial arts temple will soon go crazy and look for us. We will leave first so that we don't implicate you again. If he didn't leave now, it might be difficult for him to leave later. Su Yu nodded. Senior, have a safe journey. Hong Yang nodded and turned into a soul light that dissipated. Chapter 2732. He waited for a long time, but Han Xin did not send a message. Su Yu remained patient. With a thought, he released all the descendants of the masters that he had found. After a while, they had all woken up. When they saw Su Yu, they began to flee in all directions vigilantly. However, they were in the underground ruins, and they had nowhere to run. Some of the descendants of the masters were ready to break through the ruins and escape to the outside world. Only a few of them were calm, staring at Su Yu. If you want to die, I can help you, lest you drag me down with you, Su Yu said indifferently. His loud voice contained the space domain, which suppressed all the descendants of the masters present. Everyone was bound to the spot by the space domain, unable to move. Space domain? You're also a descendant of the masters? The descendants of the masters were overjoyed, until a descendant of the space master poured cold water on them. It was a young man who looked somewhat like Yanran. There is no such person among the descendants of the space master. The young man was calm. The crowd was in an uproar, and he added, but he is our savior. Only then did the panicking descendants of the sovereign Lord finally regain their composure. Right? They had been crucified by the Martial Path Temple. Now that they had appeared here, they could only have been rescued by the human in front of them. Thinking of this, they regained their composure and were extremely grateful. Su Yu stared at them and said, Do you still have the bloodline of the masters? The young man shook his head slightly. We were poached by the Martial Path Temple as soon as we were caught. If not for the fact that we still had some value, we would probably have been killed on the spot. A trace of disappointment flashed in Su Yu's eyes. Now that he had mastered the Yuan realm of 2 great domains, Su Yu suddenly had a plan. Rather than letting the Yuan realm of the masters benefit from others, why not obtain them all himself? All 8 great domains had reached the Yuan realm. It was equivalent to gathering the domains of the 8 great masters in one body. Would the power erupting from it be weaker than the mortal holy body? Not necessarily, right? Until now, the 8 great masters had never joined forces. Their combined strength would be an unimaginable unknown. I am indebted to you. Is there anything I can do for you? The young man felt a little uneasy. He was worried that Su Yu had ulterior motives, so he wanted to satisfy him in other ways. Su Yu muttered, I want to ask you some questions. First of all, do you know why the martial Tao Temple wants your sovereign bloodline? The other hegemonic descendants all looked confused. I'm not sure. Logically speaking, only descendants of the Sovereign Lord should be able to absorb the blood of the Sovereign Lord. I really don't know why the martial arts temple dug up our bloodline. Everyone shook their heads. Only the descendant of the Space Chief Sovereign stood there silently. Su Yu noticed it, and his eyes flickered. What do you want to know? The young man nodded hesitantly. Because my Space Dominator bloodline is relatively powerful, I passed out a little later than the others. I happened to hear some fragmented news. Oh, speak. Su Yu's eyes shone brightly. The young man said, Before I fainted that day, I vaguely heard the Martial Way Temple say that the descendants of the ancient god Jiulong have rebuilt the 8 domains. Hearing this, Su Yu's eyes shone brightly. A descendant of ancient god Jiulong? Su Yu had always been concerned about his existence. After all, from a certain perspective, ancient god descendants had the right to inherit everything that ancient god Nine Dragon had, including the divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. Suyu couldn't help but guess what the young man had heard. Could it be that a descendant of the ancient god Nine Dragon was planning to use the bloodline of the descendants of the 8 great masters to forcibly open the 8 domains? Back then, how much danger had Suyu taken to open the 8 domains? Suyu's body and soul had almost been destroyed. Now, the descendants of the ancient god Nine Dragon were planning to succeed by trickery? Anything else? Suyu asked. The young man shook his head, but then nodded. I also heard the last sentence, but it was very vague. I'm not sure. Speak. The young man hesitated. I heard him say that the ancient god Nine Dragon was coming back. What? Suyu was shocked. Are you sure you didn't hear it wrong? The young man smiled bitterly. That's why I'm not sure. How many years had the ancient god Nine Dragon been missing? He had disappeared in the Tao Abyss almost since the beginning of the era. Now that he had suddenly returned, how could he not be shocked? Suyu could no longer remain calm. The ancient god Nine Dragon. Suyu's life had changed completely since he had obtained the ancient god Nine Dragon's divine artifact. If not, now he was just a pile of bones that had been dead for at least 100 years. For some reason, Suyu desperately wanted to see the ancient god Nine Dragon. Just seeing him once was already enough for him. Taking a deep breath, Suyu said, Second question. Do you know the situation in the life zone? The young man's archery skills were extensive. He shook his head. Very bad. The Life Master is not far from death. Countless mysterious forces have appeared in her territory, lying dormant in the dark. Once she dies, the descendants of the Masters may suffer the same fate as us. Hearing that, Suyu's heart tightened. He couldn't let the Life Master die so easily. He had to ask her to make a move before she died and restore Yunyazi's soul completely. All right, I only need you to answer 2 questions. When the ground is safe, you can leave on your own, Suyu said. As for the descendants of the hegemons, there was no point in keeping them around. Besides, there was no enmity between them. Naturally, he could only let them go. The young man thought for a moment, then said, I think you are the descendant of the ancient god Nine Dragon, Suyu. The one with the sacred mortal body, right? Suyu glanced at him. Of all the descendants of the Masters, this man was the calmest and wisest. Do you have any advice for me? Suyu asked. The young man laughed. How am I qualified to give advice to the sacred body, Su? I just want to remind you of something. Speak. The young man said, I once heard the Space Master mention that someone is recasting the clone of Prince Xiaoyao to deal with you. Suyu's eyes flickered with a hint of coldness. How could he forget that the clone of Prince Xiaoyao, whose upper body had been restored, had chased after Yanran? Why? Isn't that person the Space Master or a descendant of the Space Master? Suyu asked. He had always thought that the one who had chased after Yanran was one of her brothers or sisters. The young man shook his head. No, even the fragment of Prince Xiaoyao's clone that the Space Master had was taken away by a strong man. What? Suyu raised his eyebrows. Someone who could take something from the Space Master? What kind of existence was that? Chapter 2733. Who is it? Who wanted to gather all of Prince Xiaoyao's clones? Who was so eager to deal with him? Were they some servants trained by the Holy Mountain? His heart was full of doubts. After thinking for a long time, Suyu nodded to the young man. Thank you. What's your name? The young man said, Huang Chun. I'm Yinran's brother. He looked at Suyu deeply. The news that Yanran was protected by Holy Body, Su had already spread. Oh, Suyu was surprised. No wonder this young man looked similar to Yanran. Suyu paused and shot out a few crystal balls. Huang Chun caught it and examined the extremely pure energy within it. He could not help but reveal a joyful expression. He had lost the bloodline of the Master and had no realm power. The only thing he could rely on was his cultivation. These energy balls were like a timely rain. He knelt down in gratitude. After a pause, he said, Holy Body Su, I suggest you extract all the bloodline of the Space Master from my sister's body. Suyu asked calmly why. He had never taken back what he had given away. Huang Chun said, There is a group of mysterious people in the Martial Path Temple who are taking advantage of the weakness of the 8 Masters to plunder the bloodline of the Master. Holy Body Su is kind enough to give the bloodline of the Space Master to my sister, but it is a disaster for her, not a blessing. Huang Chan said in a low voice, "If I am not mistaken, I am afraid a group of mysterious forces have already set their eyes on my sister." Hearing this, Su became serious. The appearance of the Martial Path Temple and the mysterious dark forces was indeed beyond Su Yu's expectations. He had thought that the 8 Masters were the greatest rulers of the 8-star civilization. He did not expect that there was a powerful force behind them. They appeared when the 8 Masters were weak and dying, stirring up trouble. If so, would Xiener be in danger? She was the descendant of the ancient god of Jiuyo. Would she also be targeted by this force? Thinking of this, he began to worry. He looked at the communication device again and could not help but frown. Why hadn't Han Xian sent a message? Could something have happened to her? Meanwhile, in the heavenly prison, the Martial Path Temple stood in front of the empty heavenly prison, his face gloomy. "When did Enchantress die?" Martial Arts Temple asked in a deep voice. One of the experts guarding the life medallion said in a trembling voice, 2 cups of tea ago, I discovered that the medallion had shattered. I immediately notified the Lord Sovereign. Wu Dao Temple narrowed his eyes. 2 cups of tea? He shook his head. What kind of person would be able to break through the defense of the heavenly book characters within the time it takes to brew 2 cups of tea? Moreover, he even forcefully pulled out my soul steel needle. This is impossible. The life tablet keeper trembled and immediately knelt on the ground to beg for mercy. I really didn't. The martial arts temple didn't even turn his head and said indifferently, "Take him away." The expert immediately dragged the person out. Not long after, there was a scream. An expert came back with his head. "Reporting to my lord, he has been executed." The martial arts temple nodded indifferently. "Bring me the records of the most recent entrances and exits." Soon, the bearded man at the entrance of the half-truth world was called over. Wu Dao Temple looked at him and immediately read the memories in his mind. Suddenly, the eyes of the martial arts temple fixed on a disciple. Not long after this person left, he returned to the half-truth world. His words and actions were somewhat strange. It was as if he didn't know the way. "Something's wrong. Contact this person. Where is he now?" With the order, an expert quickly came to reply. "My lord, this person is called Yuanjun. He is currently in the life domain. It would take at least a day to get here from there. Therefore, the Yuanjun who appeared in the half-truth world was definitely not a real person. It was another person in disguise. Bring the greetings here." The martial arts temple ordered again. In the bearded man's memory, Yuanjun went to the greetings hall to register. An expert immediately flashed over. In the end, what he saw was an empty hall. He realized something was wrong and immediately came back to report. Hearing this, the martial arts temple's eyes slowly narrowed. "Gone?" The martial arts temple's eyes flashed with suspicion. There were only 2 explanations for her disappearance. One was that she was already dead. The other was that she ran away. "If she's alive, I want to see her. If she's dead, I want to see her corpse." The martial arts temple ordered. Immediately, the entire soul domain was activated. While vigorously searching for the rescued soul dominator and the many descendants of the ruler. While frantically searching for Han Xian. Even the army far away at the border received the order from Central City. In a military camp, an old and prudent general was giving a lecture. "This season, everyone has performed well. I will report your achievements to Central City." In the tent, there were 2 rows of generals of different ages. Among them, there was an exceptionally young general. He frowned slightly and murmured, "Still without me?" At this moment, the smile on the old general's face disappeared. His tone changed. "However, there are some people who are extremely irresponsible and have seriously delayed the military situation. I have already reported to Central City. I am preparing to remove them from their positions." Instantly, everyone's heart tightened. Someone was going to be removed from his position. Everyone's gaze swept towards Zhang Wushuang, as if they had agreed on it. Who was the most likely to be removed from his position? Without a doubt, it was Zhang Wushuang. He had no background in the military. It was said that he was originally a slave. It was not easy for him to slowly climb to his current position with some ability. However, he was not flexible and had no background. No matter how hard he worked in the military, no matter how many contributions he made, there was no hope for him to go further. In fact, many of the contributions he made were forcibly taken away by those with background. In the military camp, he could be said to be depressed and unfulfilled. He did not expect the new commander to be so ruthless. He had been in charge of the army for half a year and was ready to eradicate Zhang Wushuang completely and drive him out of the military camp. Should one say that he was sad or pitiful? You know who I'm talking about. Wait for the notice from Central City. The old general said, "All right, the meeting is adjourned." Before leaving, he took a deep look at Zhang Wushuang. Just as the others had guessed, the person the old general was talking about was none other than Zhang Wushuang. Zhang Wushuang clenched his fists. His eyes were filled with grief and indignation. Why? I've already worked so hard. Why is it still like this? There seemed to be flames of anger burning in his chest. Ever since coming to an 8-star civilization, he had done everything he could to fight for a better environment for Han Xian. However, in the end, he still had nothing. Unfair. Too unfair. Zhang Wushuang left the military camp in a daze. He was prepared to return to the temporary base in the city to have a good rest and think of a way to protect his way of being a general. However, just as he entered the city, Chapter 2734. Who is it? Zhang Wushuang's expression changed. He was about to attack, but the black-robed person took off his hat and revealed his face. Han Xian. Zhang Wushuang immediately stopped. He was shocked. Aren't you working the half-truth world? Why are you here? The half-truth world didn't allow people to leave as they pleased. Plus, Han Xian was dressed mysteriously, which made him even more suspicious. Han Xian looked around cautiously and lowered her voice. Brother Wushuang, let's leave the soul realm. This wasn't the first time Han Xian made this suggestion. However, Zhang Wushuang rejected it every time. The world was vast. Where would they find a place to stay? It was good enough to find a place to stay in the soul realm. There was no need to risk their lives outside. However, at this moment, Zhang Wushuang surprisingly didn't object. He was about to be impeached and removed from the general position he fought so hard for. The future was bleak. What was the point of staying? Have you thought about where to go? Zhang Wushuang asked. Han Xian smiled mysteriously. There's a mysterious person who will bring us to a safe place. He's definitely reliable. Mysterious person? Zhang Wushuang didn't doubt it. Han Xian was in the half-truth world and could come into contact with people with status. It wasn't strange for her to know a mysterious person who could bring them out of the soul realm. Let me prepare. Zhang Wushuang took a deep breath. The decision was too sudden. He wasn't ready yet. Han Xian nodded. Go, but don't delay for too long. That mysterious person might not be able to wait for us. Okay. Zhang Wushuang immediately returned to the camp and organized the items he had left in the camp. Soul Crystal, Dao Artifact Cultivation Technique. Zhang Wushuang was organizing. Suddenly, a loud horn sounded from outside the tent. That was the signal for the camp to gather. As long as they were in the barracks, they had to gather there. Once someone disobeyed, they would be severely punished. Zhang Wushuang could only put down what he was doing and rush over. Soon, in the commander's tent, many generals were not dressed neatly and stood in the tent in a messy manner. The commander's face was solemn. Everyone, the ruler has issued a rank 10 order. Hearing this, many of the well-mannered generals gasped. Rank 10? Did I hear wrong? The martial arts temple's orders were divided into 10 levels, from low to high. The higher it was, the higher the level of the command, which meant that the command was more important. Until now, the rank 10 order had only been issued once. That was 100,000 years ago, when a martial arts temple had just seized the position of master. At that time, the martial arts temple was at its weakest. Because of this, he had issued a 10th rank order to exterminate all other hegemonic descendants within the region. Since then, there had never been a rank 10 order. Who would have thought that they would meet again today? This time, the level 10 order is to capture the fugitive Su Yu, as well as the palace master of the Greetings Palace, Han Xian, who fled to escape punishment. The commander's voice was sonorous and forceful. This order was received by all the military camps in the region. Our border was the last to receive it, so we are in an extremely disadvantageous position. It's very likely that the two wanted criminals have already escaped, the commander-in-chief said from above. Zhang Wushuang's mind was buzzing. Su Yu? Su Yu, the man who had always been stepping on him, stealing his emperor-killing sword and divine throne? The man that Han Xian couldn't forget? Wait a minute. How did Han Xian become a fugitive? At that moment, the commander-in-chief pasted the order scroll on the table for the generals to read. Zhang Wushuang came over to read it. The content clearly stated that Han Xian had helped the wanted criminal Su Yu to rescue many prisoners from the heavenly prison. Now she was on the run, and her whereabouts were unknown. Zhang Wushuang's body trembled as he read the scroll. He finally understood why Han Xian was dressed in a black robe. It turned out that she had helped Su Yu. And who was the mysterious man she was talking about? Zhang Wushuang finally knew. Su Yu, the Su Yu who was omnipotent in Han Xuan's eyes. Zhang Wushuang clenched his fists. He felt like he had been deceived. Could it be that after so many years, all his efforts couldn't compare to Su Yu's? Han Xian had only met Su Yu once, and she had given up everything to help him. And she even wanted to leave with him? Why? Why did this happen? As the son of destiny, he was supposed to get the Emperor's four-piece set, but Su Yu had stolen it. Now, even the heart of the woman he loved had been stolen by Su Yu. Why was this happening? Zhang Wushuang, are you all right? The commander's eyes were sharp, and he could tell that Zhang Wushuang was not in a good mood. One of the generals laughed. He was probably shocked by the generous rewards. Speaking of which, the rewards of the level 10 order are indeed generous. Look, the master said that whoever finds Su Yu will be rewarded with the position of the Deputy Region Master of the Spirit Realm, and will be sent to the Holy Land to train. My goodness, the Holy Land is a place where only adults can stay. Yes, I heard that after going there once, the soul moon above one's head will be removed, and one will become the Master's confidant, and his status will skyrocket. Sigh, if only I could find Su Yu. Zhang Wushuang heard this. An evil thought appeared in his mind uncontrollably. Report Su Yu. As long as he could report Su Yu, he could escape from his current predicament and become the Martial Path Temple's confidant. He could even enter the Holy Land. No way. How would Han Xian think of me if I did that? How would I be different from a despicable person? However, as soon as this thought appeared, it grew like a mad weed. He could no longer hold it in. He stood aside. His mind was in turmoil, and all sorts of thoughts appeared. He had been a righteous man all his life, and had never done anything that went against his morals. But today, he imagined Han Xuan's eager expression as she left with Su Yu. The evil thought in Zhang Wushuang's heart could no longer be suppressed. The commander said, "Each of you will lead a team of men and go look for Su Yu." After a pause, the commander looked at Zhang Wushuang and said, "You don't have to go. There are some logistics in the barracks that need to be managed. You will be in charge." He had even taken away Zhang Wushuang's chance to find Su Yu. It was obvious how miserable Zhang Wushuang's days in the barracks would be in the future. Hearing this, the justice in Zhang Wushuang's heart was completely suppressed. He needed to turn over a new leaf. He needed to turn over a new leaf at all costs. He needed to take back everything that belonged to him. I'm not going to be a general anymore. Zhang Wushuang took out his general order and slammed it on the table. This was what the commander had been hoping for. He put away the order indifferently and said, "Oh, then I won't keep you. I hope you can walk another path in the future. Someone, send General Zhang Wushuang a fast horse." In other words, he wanted Zhang Wushuang to leave as soon as possible. The crowd burst into laughter. He probably thought that the commander would ask him to stay. He really doesn't know his place. He is being targeted everywhere in the barracks, but he still doesn't know how to leave. If it were me, I would have left long ago. Waves of ridicule fell into Zhang Wushuang's ears. Chapter 2735. He said coldly, "There's no need. I can walk by myself." His gaze swept across everyone in the military camp. He said coldly, "All of you, behave yourselves." He swore, if he became successful one day, he would trample on all those who had bullied and humiliated him. Definitely. After leaving the military camp, Zhang Wushuang met up with Han Xian. "Brother Wushuang, are you ready?" Han Xian asked. Zhang Wushuang nodded tiredly. He had been too tired all these years. Han Xian stared at Zhang Wushuang's weathered face. His face, which should have belonged to a young man, now had the weariness of a middle-aged man. He must have been very tired all these years, because he had always wanted to take care of her. She had always understood Zhang Wushuang's feelings. In the past, Suyu had been in her heart, and she had never been able to respond. But a long time ago, Zhang Wushuang had entered her heart. Humans were not plants, and they could not be emotionless. Zhang Wushuang's care and love had moved her. So, when Suyu wanted to take her away, she thought of Zhang Wushuang. She wanted to find a safe place with Zhang Wushuang, where they could live a peaceful life. However, Zhang Wushuang was very conservative in his relationships. He had never expressed his feelings. How could Han Xian say it clearly? She would only agree when this blockhead became sensible. Just be prepared. When we reach a safe place, we can start a new life. Han Xian emphasized the word "start a new life." She hoped Zhang Wushuang could understand her deeper meaning. Unfortunately, Zhang Wushuang was absent-minded. He did not understand Han Xuan's words at all. "Let's go and meet that mysterious person." Zhang Wushuang's eyes flashed. Han Xian nodded happily. "Okay, Brother Wushuang will be surprised to see him." "Really?" Zhang Wushuang looked at Han Xuan's happy face, and his heart ached. Han Xian would probably only be this happy when she saw Suyu. As for the surprise, Suyu would be the one who would be surprised. The pain in his heart gave birth to more darkness. Several hours later, they arrived outside the central city. Zhang Wushuang said, "Han Xian, I have deposited some money in the bank. Since we are leaving, I have to withdraw it. Do you want me to go with you?" Han Xian asked. Actually, what she wanted to say was, forget about the money. However, Zhang Wushuang had painstakingly saved that money over the years. She couldn't bear to let him give up. Zhang Wushuang patted the back of her hand and said, "No need. You stay here. I'll be right back." "Oh, then be careful, brother unparalleled." Han Xian gazed at him affectionately. Zhang Wushuang turned around and entered the city. The moment he turned around, his gentle eyes were filled with coldness. In his heart, he silently said sorry. "Han Xian, I'm sorry. I know you'll hate me, but this is for your own good." Zhang Wushuang comforted himself. He was doing it for his own good. Secondly, he wanted to get rid of Han Xuan's suspicion. He arrived at the side of the Hall of Sovereigns, where there was a place to receive mission takers. He stood in the main hall and said coldly, "Find someone who can speak. There should be someone in charge of this place." The person behind the counter in front of him was just a nobody. It wasn't worth telling him about his discovery. "Can I?" All of a sudden, an indifferent voice came from behind Zhang Wushuang. Zhang Wushuang turned around, and his expression changed. He hurriedly knelt down on one knee and said respectfully, "Greetings, Sovereign." He was shocked. The Sovereign was in the Hall of Missions. The Martial Path Temple looked down at Zhang Wushuang indifferently. "Speak. Don't disappoint me." He had been waiting here for news of Suyu. However, there had been many people who had passed on false information and tried to deceive him. All of them had been killed by him. He hoped that Zhang Wushuang wouldn't disappoint him. "I know where Suyu is hiding," Zhang Wushuang said. The Martial Path Temple's pupils shrank slightly. He solemnly reminded Zhang Wushuang, "Don't blame me for not telling you. Before you came, 8 people who passed on false information died in my hands." Zhang Wushuang nodded. "I understand, but I really do know." The Martial Path Temple looked delighted. "Lead the way." However, Zhang Wushuang still knelt on one knee. The Martial Path Temple frowned slightly and said, "When Suyu's location is confirmed, you will be rewarded." Zhang Wushuang hesitated. "In addition to the reward, I hope the Sovereign can agree to another condition." "Speak." Zhang Wushuang said, "Sovereign, please forgive Han Xuan's sins." "Her?" The Martial Path Temple's eyes flashed, and he nodded lightly. "Sure." Only then did Zhang Wushuang make up his mind. "Sovereign, please follow me secretly to avoid alerting the enemy. As far as I know, Su Yu is a very vigilant and cunning person. He might escape at the slightest sign of trouble. The Martial Path Temple agreed. His first confrontation with Su Yu ended with Su Yu's escape. To avoid suspicion, Zhan Wushuang left the Hall of Missions immediately and went outside the city. Han Xian asked curiously, "Brother Wushuang, why are you so slow? There are too many people waiting in line to withdraw money." Zhan Wushuang didn't dare look at Han Xian in the eyes. Han Xian trusted Zhan Wushuang unconditionally and didn't have any doubts. She smiled and said, "Let's go." When they reached a quiet place, Han Xian immediately took out her communication device and sent a message to Su Yu, asking for his location. Su Yu, who had been waiting for a long time, finally heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately sent his address to her. However, Su Yu kept an eye on her. Han Xian has been gone for too long. To be on the safe side, I'd better be more cautious. Su Yu's heart shook. He used one thought to become real and created a fake Su Yu. His real body left the central city and observed the situation through the fake Su Yu in the distant suburbs. After half a cup of tea's time, Han Xian, who had received the message, rushed over with Zhan Wushuang. Su Yu had a complicated look in his eyes. He and Zhan Wushuang weren't enemies, but they weren't friends either. They had traveled from the Jiuzhou continent to the current 8-star civilization. They could be considered old friends. The fake Su Yu smiled at Zhan Wushuang. "I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been?" Zhan Wushuang's feelings were even more complicated. He said, "You too. You become much stronger." "I guess I was lucky." Su Yu smiled. Han Xian smiled and said, "You should talk somewhere else. It's very dangerous here." Su Yu asked, "Han Xian, where do you want to go?" Among the current 8-star civilizations, there aren't many places that can be considered safe. Most of the master's domains had collapsed. Han Xian looked at Zhan Wushuang, then at Su Yu. Suddenly, she plucked up her courage and said, "Brother Su Yu, if I get together with Zhan Wushuang one day, can you come and wish us well?" She didn't know if she would have the chance to invite Su Yu again. Therefore, she wanted to invite him while Su Yu was here. She also took the opportunity to speak her mind. Chapter 2736. "If I'm still alive, I'll come," Su Yu said with a smile. Su Yu was not surprised that they ended up together. He was not jealous. That was what Zhan Wushuang deserved. He had waited for a woman for so many years. No matter how difficult it had been, he had never left her. Even a stone man would have been moved. Not to mention the pure and kind Han Xian. He looked at Zhan Wushuang and said, "Congratulations." However, he realized that Zhan Wushuang's expression was not right. His face was stiff. However, it was not joy or surprise. It was a more complicated stiffness. It was more of panic and regret. Han Xian also realized that Zhan Wushuang's expression was not right. She blushed and said, "Senior brother Wushuang, you are making things difficult for me." She had finally mustered up the courage to express her feelings. However, Zhan Wushuang had such an expression. How could she accept this? Zhan Wushuang's mind was blank. Han Xian did not want to go with Su Yu. She wanted to stay with him forever? At this moment, Zhan Wushuang felt that he had made the worst decision in his life. When he came to his senses, Zhan Wushuang lowered his head in shame. "What did I do? If Han Xian knew about my betrayal, would she still marry me? Surely not." He clenched his fists and said in a low voice, "Su Yu, run away." Han Xian and Su Yu raised their eyebrows. Su Yu's eyes turned cold. He stepped back slowly. "Zhan Wushuang, what did you do?" Zhan Wushuang stood there motionlessly, like a wooden man. He was ashamed to respond. He could not respond in front of Han Xian. In Han Xian's eyes, he was not that kind of person. He stole a glance at Han Xian from the corner of his eyes. What made his heart ache was Han Xian was looking at him with a look of disbelief, surprise, and unfamiliarity. He would never forget that look. He knew that all his efforts over the years had been in vain. Han Xian would never marry someone like him. In an instant, Zhan Wushuang felt that he had lost the world. All he could see was darkness, self-blame, and regret. "Senior brother, tell me this is not true." Han Xian looked at Zhan Wushuang. On her way to the military camp, She had already discovered countless wanted scrolls for her and Suyu. However, she had never thought that Zhang Wushuang would report her and Suyu. In her heart, Zhang Wushuang was never a sinister person. In his entire life, he had never done anything that went against his conscience. Zhang Wushuang's face stiffened, and he held on to Han Chuan's shoulders as he said, I did it to save you. You colluded with Su Yu and released the people in the great prison. Will the master let you off? Han Chuan's eyes slowly lost focus. His whole body was indescribably cold. She felt that the Zhang Wushuang in front of her was no longer the Zhang Wushuang she knew. She said in a daze, if you hadn't reported us, how would the sovereign have discovered us? You're actually doing this for yourself, right? For her, it was just an excuse to comfort himself. If he really cared about Han Xian, then he should understand that Han Xian didn't want Su Yu to be harmed. Zhang Wushuang was in pain. He shook Han Chuan's shoulder. He hoped that his figure would be reflected in those eyes that had lost focus. However, Han Chuan's eyes gradually dimmed. She could no longer focus on Zhang Wushuang's figure. Han Xian, don't be afraid. The master has already promised me that he will forgive you for your sins. Really? Zhang Wushuang said. However, Han Xian only pushed his hand away expressionlessly. She silently walked over to Su Yu's side. She grabbed onto Su Yu's arm, tears of regret flowing down her face. Su Yu, I'm sorry. She had harmed Su Yu. Su Yu had already left, but he had stayed behind to wait for her. Su Yu stroked her head, a complicated look in his eyes. It was I who harmed you. He raised his head to look at the sky. There, a mighty youth was already standing with his arms crossed. Zhang Wushuang followed his gaze and looked up. He hurriedly said, Master. The martial path temple waved his hand indifferently. Su Yu, who had transformed into a true thought, immediately turned into smoke and dissipated. He landed in the ruins below and said calmly, It seems like he is more cunning than I thought. But his gaze shifted and fell on Han Xian. His weakness is still here. Zhang Wushuang suddenly felt that something was amiss. He tried to block Han Xian like before. However, how could Zhang Wushuang stop the master? The martial path temple gently squeezed Han Chuan's neck. Zhang Wushuang's expression changed drastically. Master, you said that you would spare Han Chuan's life. He said hurriedly. Unfortunately, the martial path temple did not care about a small fry like him. The prerequisite is that we find Su Yu, the martial path temple said calmly. But we haven't found him yet. The martial path temple squeezed Han Chuan's neck and said calmly, Su Yu, I will give you 3 breath time to come out. Otherwise, you will regret it for the rest of your life. 1. Sigh. A sigh could be heard in the ruins below. Su Yu tore through space and arrived in front of the martial path temple. From a moment, the martial path temple appeared. Su Yu knew that Han Xian would end up like this. Let her go. She is just an insignificant woman, Su Yu said calmly. It did not matter whether he killed Han Xian or not. The martial path temple looked at Su Yu calmly. Where is the person you saved? Su Yu shrugged. As you can see, the place was empty. There was no one there. The martial path temple's eyes shone with murderous intent. He said, Fine, then use yourself as a replacement. Surrender, or she will die. He tightened his grip on Han Chuan's neck, causing it to creak. Su Yu's eyes were fierce. Martial Path Temple, you are so powerful. Why do you need to threaten a weak woman? However, his provocation did not work on the Martial Path Temple at all. If I can use the simplest and most effective method to subdue the enemy, why should I do it? The Martial Path Temple said calmly. Kneel down and surrender. Zhang Wushuang, who was standing aside, was furious. He opened his eyes wide and roared at Su Yu. Kneel! Kneel! Su Yu stood where he was. He was struggling. He had experienced the same situation once before. At that time, the Demon Emperor had intervened and he had survived. Would there still be any chance of survival now? Moreover, he understood. Even if he surrendered, Han Xian would still die. However, Zhang Wushuang did not understand. He kept roaring and yelling. It was as if Han Xian would be saved if Su Yu knelt. Su Yu looked at him. There was no hatred in his eyes, only pity. A pity for someone who had lost their life. Zhang Wushuang had completely collapsed. Suyu took a deep breath and said, "I will surrender. Don't hurt her." He looked around. The best time to strike was when he was about to kneel. That was the most relaxed moment for the Martial Path Temple. If he could seize the opportunity and use the Time Realm, he might be able to save Han Xian. Chapter 2737. However, just as Suyu was about to take action, on the other hand, Han Xuan's body emitted a bloody aura. His expression was one of extreme agony. Suyu's eyes turned grave. "Martial Principal Temple, what have you done?" Zhan Wushuang's eyes widened, and he said, "Sovereign, wait a little longer." Just as Suyu was about to surrender, he wondered what the master had done to Han Xian. Wu Dao Temple frowned slightly and said, "It wasn't me." She detonated the Dao artifact hidden in her body. Han Xuan's Dao artifact was a pill that could be kept in her stomach. Once detonated, the host would be blown to pieces from the inside out. "Han Xian, stop right now!" Suyu shouted. Han Xian struggled with great difficulty and revealed an apologetic look. She spat out 2 words with great difficulty. Goodbye. She would rather die than see Suyu kneel down for her. Moreover, Suyu had been implicated by her and Zhan Wushuang. No. Suyu pounced on her, his eyes red. However, he was still a step too late. Once that Dao artifact was activated, it would immediately explode, not giving anyone any time to react. With a loud explosion, Han Xian exploded into nothingness from the inside out, leaving not even a speck of dust behind. All that was left was the echo of the explosion echoing in the air. Suyu was pushed back by the explosion, and his face was filled with grief. She died just like that? Come back to life. Suyu immediately used the domain of life in an attempt to revive Han Xian. However, the explosion of the Dao artifact had destroyed everything about Han Xian. Not even a trace of her aura was left. It was impossible to bring the dead back to life. The apologetic look in Han Xuan's eyes before she died and her goodbye echoed in his mind. Suyu felt as if his heart was being pierced by a knife. Zhan Wushuang. Suyu raised his eyes and let out a furious roar. It was all Zhan Wushuang's fault. Yet, out of nowhere, he wanted to report Suyu and use Suyu's death to get what he wanted. In the end, it killed Han Xian. Zhan Wushuang stood rooted to the ground and looked at Han Xian in disbelief. His 100 years of life collapsed at this moment. His mind sank into an eternal darkness. It wasn't me. It's not my fault. Zhan Wushuang looked at his hands, unable to accept this fact. He killed the woman he loved the most? No, it's not like that. It's you. Zhan Wushuang's eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at Suyu coldly. It's you who killed Han Xian. If you hadn't appeared, would she still have died? It's all your fault. It's all your fault. Bang! The divine throne of heaven and earth and the emperor killing sword appeared around him. I'll kill you. Zhan Wushuang roared as he charged over with the 2 emperor armaments. He had completely lost his mind and was like a beast that wanted to eat people. Suyu was furious. Zhan Wushuang, I should have turned you into ashes long ago. Suyu gnashed his teeth in hatred. He was the one who caused Han Xuan's death, but he didn't regret it at all. How could this kind of person become a natural monarch? Get back to me. Suyu did not retreat. He turned into an afterimage and charged forward. His space domain instantly shot out, turning into an arc-shaped circle that bombarded over. Zhan Wushuang gritted his teeth and roared, Emperor Set. The heaven and earth divine throne was behind him, and the ferocious emperor killing sword erupted with soaring killing intent. Destroy. The 2 forces fused into Zhan Wushuang's body. The sword slashed forward, emitting a mighty power comparable to a middle-stage Earthmaster. Swoosh! With a sharp sound, a hole was cut open in the space domain. Zhan Wushuang charged through the opening and roared, You're nothing more than this. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the space domain that had clearly been torn apart exploded instantly, raising the entire space nearby to the ground. Zhan Wushuang was the first to bear the brunt of the attack, and he vomited blood on the spot. The heaven and earth divine, thrown behind him, and the emperor killing sword in his hand were sent flying. Just as he was about to retrieve the 2 items, a space power flashed past. It swept away the heaven and earth divine throne and the emperor killing sword. It then appeared in front of Su Yu. The heaven and earth divine throne and the emperor killing sword only recognized Su Yu. They were extremely intelligent and immediately fled back to where they came from. However, Su Yu only snorted through his nostrils. Try and escape. One sword and one throne, they immediately stopped, not daring to move. The former emperor killing sword had been drained of some of its Tao reign by Su Yu. As for the heaven and earth divine throne, it had been tamed by Su Yu and almost destroyed. Now that it saw Su Yu, how could it dare resist? Su Yu gripped the emperor killing sword and sat on the heaven and earth divine throne, looking down at Zhang Wushuang coldly. Zhang Wushuang's eyes widened. Let go of my emperor's set. Su Yu was indifferent. Yours? Have you forgotten who gave it to you? I'm just taking it back now. Whether it was the emperor killing sword or the heaven and earth divine throne, they were all given to Zhang Wushuang by Su Yu. Whether he admitted it or not, that was the truth. The emperor's set was born to be mine. Zhang Wushuang roared. He did not feel that he owed Su Yu anything. Instead, he resented Su Yu for taking away his things and destroying them. Born to be, Su Yu gripped the emperor killing sword and stabbed it forward. The emperor killing sword immediately grew infinitely long, stabbing towards Zhang Wushuang. It would only take a breath to suck Zhang Wushuang dry. However, at that moment, the martial path temple strolled over. With a light tap of his foot, a powerful soul energy shocked the emperor killing sword. The latter trembled slightly and immediately stopped its attack. So, you're the owner of the emperor four-piece set. Unexpectedly, the martial path temple knew about the emperor's set. He looked at Zhang Wushuang in surprise. I almost forgot about a talent like you. He patted Zhang Wushuang's shoulder. Stand down. You cannot die here. He looked at Su Yu and asked calmly, Do you need me to do it? Su Yu's cold gaze shifted from Zhang Wushuang to the martial path temple. You should regret what you did just now. An ice-cold aura flowed out from his body. If Zhang Wushuang was only an accomplice, the martial path temple was the real culprit. I have never regretted anything in my life, the martial path temple said indifferently. All right, I'll move my finger a little. He lifted his finger. Countless black shadows immediately appeared around Su Yu. They quickly pounced forward, trying to restrain Su Yu. However, Su Yu had a premonition. He stomped his foot and crushed the black shadows. The martial path temple's finger trembled, his eyes filled with surprise. Yuan level soul realm? He immediately understood, a hint of annoyance on his face. That old thing actually gave you the bloodline of the soul master? What did Su Yu give to the death abyss? A sense of threat lingered in his heart. In this world, two-time masters were not allowed to exist. If only one existed, it could only be him. All right, let me see how powerful you are. The martial path temple grunted angrily. Chapter 2738. Su Yu stood motionless on the spot. The surging sound of the soul attack went straight to the depths of his soul. Su Yu's soul was covered by a layer of the soul emperor robe. Under the effect of this robe, the soul attack was immediately blocked. At the same time, Su Yu's own soul formed a halo, pushing the attack out of his body. Wu Dao Temple frowned deeply. That old guy really knows how to make trouble for me. Soul gaze. A huge moon appeared in the sky, like a half-opened eye, staring coldly at Su Yu. All of a sudden, Su Yu felt as if a formless power had grabbed his soul and was trying to pull it out of his body. Even the soul emperor robe could not block that force. But what he knew, so did Su Yu. Soul gaze. This was one of the secret techniques passed down by the soul dominator. A moon also appeared above Su Yu's head. Under the moonlight, Wu Dao Temple's soul was pulled out of his body uncontrollably. Both of their souls were pulled out of their bodies. They were exposed in their soul form. In comparison, Wu Dao Temple's soul was stronger, at the level of a true master of the heavenly law, so it looked more solid. On the other hand, Su Yu was just a master of the heavenly law soul. He was slightly weak. The only similarity was that both of them were Yuan-level domains. Wu Dao Temple's face was cold. There's only one master in this world. That is me. Buzz. The sky trembled, and the moon above his head gradually changed from a hazy glow to a blood-red color. The crescent moon suddenly opened like a ball of blood. That old thing is still in my hands. Where did you get the courage to fight me with his domain? Wu Dao Temple sneered coldly. Under the illumination of the ball of blood, the world was dyed in blood. Many creatures let out painful roars. It was visible to the naked eye. Their souls, under the illumination of the blood light, were constantly being roasted and quickly evaporated. Some weaker creatures, exposed to the blood light, had their souls evaporated in no time. They were already in such a state. Not to mention Suyu, who was close to them. He was exposed to more than 90% of the blood light. Moreover, his soul was exposed directly. Suddenly, Suyu felt as if his whole body was burning. His soul was showing signs of energy loss. It's called the Soul Crimson Eye. Why don't you show it to me? The martial arts temple said disdainfully, I told you that no one will understand my talent. He was able to comprehend the soul shadow art that the abyss of death had never taught him with his own strength. One could imagine his talent. The soul blood was a great soul secret technique that he had created himself. One of a kind. Suyu was indeed unable to use it. However, he had another elemental level domain. Time reversal, Suyu said calmly. With him as the center, time within a 3-inch radius began to reverse. The soul power that he had lost instantly recovered. Moreover, under the continuous effect of that power, Lin Yun's body trembled violently. The blood-red light of the soul blood, I couldn't do any damage to him. Yuan level soul domain. Martial arts temple clenched his teeth. The 8 domains really shouldn't be controlled by you. With a cold snort, he took out a mirror. It was the soul dominator's quasi-holy artifact. Suyu's expression changed slightly, and he tried his best to shift his gaze away from the mirror, to avoid being affected by the mirror. However, the might of a semi-sage artifact was unimaginable. The mirror waved at Suyu. Whether he looked at the mirror or not, he would be affected by it. Suyu's image was left in the mirror. The strange thing was that the image was alive. Come out. Martial arts temple bellowed. From the mirror, a soul body that looked exactly like Suyu walked out. Whether it was temperament, appearance, or energy, even the abilities he had mastered were exactly the same. Time acceleration, Suyu said calmly after appearing in the mirror. Instantly, Suyu's time reversal was lifted. The blood sun in the sky harmed Suyu's body again. Martial arts temple said coldly, a man's greatest enemy is himself. Let me see what else you can do. Soul death sound. Martial arts temple's expression suddenly turned serious. He weaved his hands together and began to recite the extremely obscure words of the heavenly book. After the words of the heavenly book were recited, they all turned into new pitch-black words. Wisps of aura that threatened the soul were released. This is the secret technique that I am most proud of in my life. It is a pity that I have never found a strong opponent who can rival it. Martial arts temple showed a trace of regret. If you can survive one of my attacks, I can look up to you. Martial arts temple said calmly. In his eyes, Suyu, a small master of the soul realm, did not exist. His vision was incomparably high. Suyu sensed danger. He shouted, Future incarnation! Swoosh! The future incarnation appeared. Seeing the scene in front of him, he could not help but be startled. Another me? On the ground. Countless people stared at the extremely strange scene in the sky. 3 identical Suyu appeared under the same sky at the same time. Martial arts temple did not care. No matter how many of you come, it is meaningless. You will all die under the soul death sound. Suyu frowned and said, Stop this person from performing the spell immediately. Intuition told him that the spell that was being used in actual combat was very dangerous. He must not let it succeed. The future incarnation also sensed the danger and immediately took action. However, as soon as he moved, Suyu in the mirror performed time freeze and attacked the future incarnation. The future incarnation was frozen on the spot. He secretly performed the time realm to dissolve the domain on his body. However, it was only dissolved. The soul realm of the future incarnation and Suyu in the mirror were almost the same. Neither of them could do anything to the other. As a result, the future incarnation could not move an inch. The feeling of fighting with myself is really refreshing. The future incarnation complained. Of all the things to cultivate, why did you cultivate the time realm? That was not all. Suyu in the mirror raised his hand and shouted majestically, "Time reverse river!" Crash! A long river of time that traversed the world appeared in the sky. It shrouded both the future incarnation and himself. Suyu in the mirror was using it to block them and not allow them to disturb the martial arts temple. Suyu said coldly, "Let's join forces." Future Suyu said, "Let's kill this imposter together." Time freeze. The two of them shouted together. 2 yuan grade time domains were unleashed at the same time, turning into an unstoppable time power. It suppressed the long river of time that was summoned, revealing Suyu in the mirror who was hiding in it. Time deprivation. Soul destruction. 2 different yuan, level time, realms attack Suyu in the mirror. Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. Suyu gritted his teeth, took out the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron, and patted it with both palms. Chapter 2739. Future Suyu's scalp went numb. What the heck, real body, can't you train less? Even I am afraid of myself. Suyu was also surprised. The Suyu in the mirror could even imitate the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron. Isn't this a little too realistic? However, Suyu was alone in the mirror, and he was destined to be no match for the two of them. Swish, swish! One of them summoned the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron, and the other summoned the Domain Cauldron. Rumble! The 3 cauldrons collided violently in the air. First, the Domain Cauldron shattered in the clash between the 2 Divine Nine Dragon Cauldrons. Then, Suyu's Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron in the mirror shattered with a loud bang. The real Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron's power was greatly reduced, and it returned to Suyu's palm. Shortly after, the attacks of the 2 men arrived with a loud rumble, causing Suyu, who was in the mirror, to retreat repeatedly. However, even as he was injured, he continued to use time reversal. In an instant, his injuries were completely healed. At the same time, he reacted quickly and immediately counterattacked. 8 great domains. In the mirror, Suyu's eyes shone with the light of the 8 great domains. Among the 8 domains, there were 2 elemental domains. The power was naturally incomparable. The future incarnation laughed angrily. "Main body, can you still tolerate this fool using our things to deal with us?" Suyu said coldly, "Cut the crap. Suppress him completely." 8 domains. 8 domains. 2 of the 8 domains were executed at the same time. The result was predictable. In the mirror, Suyu's 8 great domains were immediately crushed by 2 of the 8 great domains. However, in the mirror, Suyu's 3rd wave of attack was ready to be launched. He didn't give the 2 Suyus the chance to kill him. Fortunately, Suyu had anticipated this. There was no one in the world who could understand himself better than himself. If this continued, the Suyu in the mirror would attack endlessly. Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron, suppress. He threw out his palm. The Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron turned into a colossal object that was as large as the sky. It pressed down on Suyu's reflection from above, preparing to refine him directly. However, in the mirror, Suyu was already prepared. With a space domain, he immediately disappeared. However, he had just appeared from the space domain. Caught off guard, he was enveloped by another prepared domain cauldron. In the mirror, Suyu resisted desperately, bursting forth with a peerlessly powerful domain. With a cracking sound, a crack appeared on the domain cauldron. Then, Suyu's figure flew out of the mirror. However, as soon as he appeared, the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron fell down and suppressed him. In the mirror, Suyu refused to compromise and resisted with all his might. Suyu stepped on the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron and suppressed it completely. He then activated the Divine Nine Dragon Cauldron to refine it completely. Incarnation, go quickly. Taking advantage of this time, he ordered. How could the future incarnation dare to hesitate? He immediately attacked the martial arts temple. However, after such a long time, the voice of death of the martial arts temple had been completed. He suddenly opened his eyes, which were filled with a layer of coldness that deterred the world. Ooh. He took a deep breath and grinned coldly. Come, I'll let you have a taste of the power of the heavenly death melody. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The densely packed black heavenly book characters swept over like a pear blossom rainstorm. The future incarnation was caught off guard and immediately unleashed its time domain. Time freeze. However, the heavenly book characters could not be controlled at all and swept over without losing any momentum. The future incarnation was surprised and immediately took out the domain Cauldron to block in front of him. However, the heavenly book characters completely ignored the domain Cauldron, penetrated it, and hit the future Suyu directly. Just one heavenly book character hit the future Suyu. He was immediately smashed into ashes. There was no room for compromise at all. Suyu's pupils shrank as he watched. Seeing the sky full of heavenly book characters coming towards him, he took out the divine nine-dragon Cauldron and slapped it hard, sending the Suyu in a mirror flying out. He happened to be hit by one of the characters. In an instant, the Suyu in the mirror did not even have the chance to resist and was bombarded into nothingness. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Suyu tried to take out the divine nine-dragon Cauldron to wipe out the heavenly book characters. However, the characters ignored all attacks. What was even more terrifying was Suyu tried to change directions. The heavenly book characters followed closely, and the distance between them could not be widened no matter how hard he tried to escape. The Martial Path Temple said sympathetically, "It's useless. This is my strongest secret soul technique. Once it is used, it will be closely linked to your soul, and you will not be able to escape." Looking at the scene of Suyu dodging in panic, he shook his head slightly. "It seems that you will die without a doubt. How disappointing." Swoosh, swoosh. The heavenly book characters that filled the sky were about to bombard him. Suyu gritted his teeth and waved his palm. Suddenly, a long pitch-black sickle appeared in his palm. The Space Dominator bloodline in his body immediately boiled. The black sickle in his palm immediately turned into a burning red sickle. Moreover, its shape changed drastically. First, it was the handle. It was originally a metallic luster, but now it had turned into an ancient vine wood. The pitch-black sickle had turned into a mysterious object with 9 heads. Those heads were the heads of Tao Tai. Moreover, on each head, there was a Tao Tai's eye. When the Martial Path Temple saw this object, his pupils suddenly shrank. His face, which had always been cold, burst into a look of horror. The great sickle of 10,000 tribulations? How could it be in your hands? He actually knew this object. Moreover, unprecedented fear broke out in his eyes. Suyu's eyes were cold. The future incarnation had been beaten half to death by the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations. One could imagine its power. After releasing the true state of the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations with the bloodline of the ruler, Suyu held it with both hands and continued to instill the power of the realm. The Martial Path Temple retreated in horror. "No, stop." But why would Suyu listen? He waved it fiercely at the Martial Path Temple. Roar. 9 deafening, fierce roars suddenly erupted. The 9 Tao Tai's eyes opened at the same time, emitting 9 beams of destructive black light. The black light swept past, and everything disappeared into thin air. The sky disappeared directly, revealing nothingness. The nothingness also disappeared strangely, revealing the Great Defensive Formation. Even the Great Defensive Formation disappeared. A large empty space was revealed. The 9 beams of black light formed a line and swept away. Everything that was swept away was turned into nothingness. They did not disappear. Instead, they were devoured by the Tao Tai's eyes for eternity. Even the sound of death, which was so powerful today, was devoured in an instant. Not even a trace of it was left. The Martial Path Temple's face changed dramatically. He grabbed Zhang Wushuang, who had a stiff expression on his face, with one hand. Then, he tore through the sky and escaped. He even gave up the soul realm that he had painstakingly built for countless years. "Save me." The Martial Path Temple took out an ancient sword and stabbed it into the sky. Suddenly, a beam of light fell from the sky. In an instant, the Martial Path Temple and Zhan Wushuang were swept away. The black light swept past, brushing past the Martial Path Temple's body. The black light did not slow down. It bombarded the half-true realm. The half-true realm only lasted for a moment before it disappeared completely. After a long time, the black light finally dissipated completely. What was left was half of the flattened, no, the soul realm that had been devoured. Chapter 2740. Suyu stared in the direction where the Martial Path Temple had escaped. Who had saved him? Where did that beam of light come from? The Martial Path Temple was not an ordinary master, but belonged to a huge hidden force? Roar. 9 roars interrupted Suyu's thoughts. He stared at the scythe of 10,000 tribulations in his hand, which was still bursting with black light. Suyu immediately stopped instilling the domain, and the blood of the master also calmed down. In this way, the scythe of 10,000 tribulations finally returned to an ordinary scythe. The scythe of 10,000 tribulations made from the head of a Tao Tai. Suyu was shocked. He had seen the Tao Tai with his own eyes and knew how terrifying it was. To be able to cut off the heads of 9 Tao Tais and refine them into a Tao artifact. No, it should be a quasi-sane artifact. It was not hard to imagine who this person was. Apart from those on the Holy Mountain, there should be few people who could do it. After putting away the scythe of 10,000 tribulations, Suyu looked at the soul realm that had been destroyed. There was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Although the soul realm was destroyed and the Martial Path Temple retreated. However, some people were still lost. Maybe we shouldn't have reunited, Suyu murmured. An inexplicable sadness surged in his heart. First Xie Xiaoye, then Han Xian. One by one, the old friends who had appeared in his life disappeared in front of him. They had become irretrievable. Was this a regret in life, or was it fate? He clenched his fists, sat cross-legged on a meteorite, and took out the bronze plate. The ruler of the abyss of death once said, the bronze plate was the key to reaching the realm of returning. If he could study the mystery, he might be able to pass through 2 worlds. He would bring back all those who had disappeared from life forever from the realm of returning. Just like Xie silently brought Suyu back with 10 years of time. The Tao Abyss. Suyu looked at the outer region, a deep existence. If there was no accident, that should be the legendary Tao Abyss. The bronze plate came from the Tao Abyss. If he wanted to crack the secret, he had to return to the Tao Abyss to explore. After thinking for a long time, Suyu put away the bronze plate. He had made up his mind that when everything in the 8-star civilization was over, it would be time to go to the Tao Abyss. Swish! Suddenly, a slight fluctuation came from afar. Suyu glanced sideways and could clearly sense an extraordinary life force surging toward him like a tsunami from the dark void. Life Master, have you seen enough? Suyu asked calmly. The soul realm was a neighbor of the life realm. As the life sovereign who had yet to die, how could she not notice such a huge commotion? Back when he was fighting the Martial Way Temple, the life god had been watching from the side. Only now did he finally show himself. A jade-green ripple slowly spread out. In the void, countless graceful flowers appeared out of thin air, exuding the aura of life. Amidst the countless flowers, a beautiful 19-year-old girl wearing a veil slowly walked over. Unlike the other hegemons, the life hegemon had eternal life, as well as a face that would never grow old. From beginning to end, she was like a 19-year-old girl. Greetings, sacred physique Su. The life sovereign's voice was gentle and beautiful. Her temperament was even more ethereal, like a fairy who didn't eat the food of the mortal world. Suyu stood up slowly and said coldly, "You are really bold to appear in front of the descendant of the ancient god Julong." Wasn't she afraid that Suyu would end her life with the sickle? I'm not your enemy, so why don't I dare to show myself? The life sovereign's veil fluttered as she smiled calmly. Suyu understood the meaning behind her words and said, "The hatred between the ancient god Julong and the 8 great rulers is well known, right?" The life sovereign smiled sweetly and shook her head. "That is with the ancient god Julong, not with you." Suyu really didn't want to be an enemy of the life sovereign. In fact, he even needed her help with some things. Tell me, why are you looking for me? Suyu asked. The life sovereign wouldn't appear unless it was necessary. The life sovereign said softly, if I say I am here to give you the life domain, would you believe me? Huh? Suyu was shocked and asked in confusion why. It was hard to imagine that the life sovereign would voluntarily give her domain to someone else. That would mean that the life sovereign would lose her identity and become immortal. The life sovereign walked over slowly with a hint of helplessness and sorrow in her eyes. If you had something that many people covet, what would you do? Suyu thought about it and said, fight to the end. The life sovereign's bitterness deepened. What if you have no fighting power and can only protect yourself from destruction? Suyu finally understood what she meant. The life sovereign was targeted by the great force of the Martial Path Temple, who wanted to steal her bloodline. Although the life sovereign was a ruler, her fighting power was the lowest among all the domains. Her life domain could only ensure that she and her subordinates were immortal. In a real fight, she would be at a disadvantage. You can give it to anyone else, but why give it to me? Suyu asked. The life sovereign shouldn't be short of descendants. Because I hope you can owe me a favor. When I return to the world of the living, you will remember this favor, the life sovereign said calmly. As the life sovereign, even if she gave up the life domain, she would still die. It was better to die on her own. When the era restarted and the world created a new ruler, she would be reborn. However, at that time, she would be at her weakest. She needed some help. Suyu was the best choice. Hearing this, Suyu pondered for a long time. If you already have such a plan, I can promise you, obtaining the Yuan-level life domain and assisting the reborn life sovereign once in the future was very worthwhile. Good. The life sovereign smiled lightly. Her crystal-like eyes stared at Suyu without blinking. Thank you. As her voice fell, her body burned with a layer of emerald flame. Drops of the ruler's bloodline were burned out. In the end, a fist-sized jade-green liquid appeared in his palm. The burning life sovereign held it and handed it to Suyu. Here you are. At the same time, the life sovereign also took out an emerald ball. This is my saint artifact, exquisite Xuanji. The life sovereign even gave her half-saint artifact to Suyu. Its function is to restore the life of the dead in a large area. Suyu couldn't be more familiar with this. It was equivalent to an enlarged version of resurrection. It was not very useful. In addition, there is another function that those people desperately want. The life sovereign revealed a mysterious smile. Oh, exquisite Xuanji, why don't you try absorbing my ruler's bloodline? Suyu was puzzled and immediately activated exquisite Xuanji. What surprised him was that exquisite Xuanji had absorbed all of the life god's bloodline. Chapter 2741. Even an outsider like Suyu could fuse it into his body immediately. Could this be? Suyu said in surprise. The god of life nodded slightly. That's right. You can refine all chief hegemonic bloodlines. If you have the chance to obtain other chief hegemonic bloodlines, you can also refine exquisite jade and make it your own. If this item was obtained by the power behind a martial arts temple, the consequences could be imagined. With the hegemon bloodlines they currently possessed, they could create someone with multiple hegemon bloodlines in a very short time. No wonder the martial Dao temple was capturing hegemonic descendants and extracting their blood. It turned out that he had prepared such an ambitious plan. I've handed everything over to you. I hope you won't go back on your word. The life sovereign was burned until she became transparent. His life force was rapidly decreasing. Suyu cupped his fists and said, Go in peace. When you reappear in this world, I will find you. The life dominus smiled sweetly. Thank you. Then it turned completely transparent. The life sovereign had passed away just like that. Within the life realm, among the 8-star civilizations, the life sector was the most flourishing. This was because the living beings in the life realm were constantly enveloped by the life sovereign's life aura. It was almost immortal, enjoying eternal life. Now that the life sovereign was dead, the chief sovereign aura that they had obtained over a long period of time had vanished. In a short period of time, more than half of them died. The entire life realm turned into a deathly silent ghost realm. Suyu absorbed the life domain on the spot. Because Linglong Xuanji had already refined the bloodline, Suyu managed to fuse the bloodline in an instant. His domain immediately rose to the Yuan level. At this point, Suyu had mastered the time, soul, and life domains at the same time. He controlled 3 of the 8 elemental realms. How many people among the 8-star civilizations could still fight? Apart from the extremely mysterious chief sovereign of death, who might pose a threat to him, no one should be able to fight him. Having mastered the Yuan level life domain, Suyu had no choice but to extract Yun Yazi's soul. The Abyss of Death had once said that Yun Yazi's body would only be in a weakened state after being resurrected with his intermediate life force domain. It was far inferior to the Yuan level life domain, which could restore it to its strongest state. As he stared at Yun Yazi's soul, Suyu could not help but feel nervous. Could it really restore Yun Yazi to his peak state? He had waited too long for this day. Taking a deep breath, Suyu immediately displayed the Yuan level life domain. Under the effects of the domain, Yun Yazi's soul was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, with this strand of soul as the foundation. After the time it takes to burn half an incense stick, the entire outline of Yun Yazi began to reappear. Then it slowly solidified. His soul energy began to swell. It didn't take long for him to reach the Yellow Path Master realm, and then he climbed rapidly to the Earth Path Master realm. However, this was only the beginning. He had no intention of stopping. In the blink of an eye, he had surpassed the realm of a heavenly law lord. Suyu was surprised. Is Yun Yazi really a master of the heavenly Tao? Wouldn't his peak state be comparable to a sovereign's? However, reality proved that Suyu had still underestimated Yun Yazi. His soul energy continued to surge, and it didn't take long for him to break through to the peak of early-stage Heavenly Tao Lord. In terms of pure soul strength, it was comparable to all the rulers Suyu had ever seen. What was even more frightening was the fact that the surge had yet to stop. After a difficult climb, he had finally reached the mid-stage of the Tao of Heaven. The strength of his soul was second only to the Demon Emperor that Suyu had seen. All of a sudden, the 8-star civilizations were shaken. Countless surviving creatures could feel the pressure coming from their souls. In the abyss outside the area, a destructive aura erupted, as if responding to the arrival of such a powerful aura. Finally, Yun Yazi's soaring soul finally stopped. However, Suyu's heart couldn't calm down. This was Yun Yazi at his peak. He was an existence that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Demon Emperor. At this moment, Yun Yazi's soul slowly opened its eyes. In an instant, the great formation outside the area trembled violently. It was as if it couldn't withstand the fluctuations and was about to shatter. He looked at the shattered 8-star civilization, his face filled with deep sorrow. The last island has been destroyed. Island? Suyu was confused. He didn't understand what Yun Yazi meant by the island. The absolute beginning creatures have reached a point where they can no longer retreat. Yun Yazi's eyes were filled with sorrow. He stood there for a long time. Then he finally looked at Suyu, his eyes filled with deep emotion. Child, you've suffered. He remembered that he should have died under the sword of the sinful lady. Now, he could be resurrected, and he was restored to his original peak state. One could imagine how much suffering Suyu had gone through. Master, welcome back. Suyu cupped his fists and bowed deeply. Yun Yazi looked a little ashamed and laughed at himself. In this world, how can there be a master who needs a disciple to save him twice? I really don't have the face to call myself your master. Besides, I haven't taught you anything. What you have now is almost all your own. Yun Yazi felt even more ashamed. He had only given Suyu 2 things. One was the wordless heavenly book. The other was the heaven's sun gazing at air. The rest were all obtained by Suyu with confidence. If Master hadn't supported me when I was weak, how could I be where I am today? Suyu said gratefully. Back then, the abyss of Wudong didn't have Yun Yazi's help. Suyu had probably become a skeleton at the bottom of the abyss. Sigh. Yun Yazi sighed deeply. I have never owed anyone anything in my life. You are the only one who owes me too much. Su Yu was about to say something. Yun Yazi looked up at the abyss outside the area and said slowly, "Fine, let me do something for you. Master, just protect yourself. Don't take any more risks for me." Su Yu caught Yun Yazi's gaze and stopped him. In that abyss was a being that even the 8 great masters were wary of. Yun Yazi was a soul, so it was best not to go. Yun Yazi looked at Su Yu and shook his head. "If you don't go now, it will be too late. You have been lacking the 9th realm for too long." "The 9th realm?" Su Yu was stunned. Weren't there only 8 great realms in this world? Where did the 9th realm come from? Sensing the confusion in Su Yu's eyes, Yun Yazi said, "Don't be surprised. There's a 9th realm in the great beginning realm. When the era was restarted, the Holy Mountain gave birth to the 9 great realms." What? This secret completely subverted Su Yu's understanding of the world. The masters of the 8 great realms, the 8 great masters, had a large part of their realms intercepted by the ancient god Cauldron. Yun Yazi seemed to know the past and future of the world. Only the master of the 9th realm was able to predict the situation and escape the disaster. Now, he should be hiding in the abyss. Su Yu was shocked and couldn't help but take out the divine 9-dragon cauldron. In the end, there was a dragon that couldn't be crystallized and couldn't give birth to rules. Su Yu had always thought that his method was wrong. Now he understood that the ancient god Cauldron was planning to plunder the 9 great masters' realms. However, he only succeeded in taking the realms of the 8 great masters. Chapter 2742. In other words, the divine 9-dragon cauldron was a damaged sacred artifact. He was missing the last domain. However, Su Yu couldn't figure out what the last domain would be. Su Yu had only sensed the existence of the 8 great realms. "Master, even if it's as you said, the divine 9-dragon cauldron lacks the last domain, so what? Why did you say that things might change if we delay?" Su Yu asked. Yun Yazi looked up at the sky. Su Yu followed his gaze and looked over. In the sky above the broken 8-star civilization, in the dark void, there was a faint yellow light. At first glance, it looked like a star, but in reality, it wasn't light. Instead, it was an unknown existence. That direction, if you remember correctly, it should be the sacred mountain. Yun Yazi sighed softly. The sacred mountain has been destroyed, and the era has been restarted. The 9th ruler will definitely appear. If we don't find him before he does, we won't have the chance. Yun Yazi looked meaningfully at the divine 9-dragon cauldron. "There is someone who desires the 9th realm more than you." Hearing this, Su Yu's heart was moved. He was well aware of who Yun Yazi was talking about. "Master, it doesn't matter if you can't get it, but please don't take the risk. The Tao Abyss is too dangerous," Su Yu said. Yun Yazi shook his head. "If I don't go, you will be in even more danger." When he finished speaking, he did not give Su Yu a chance to refute, and he waved his finger in front of Su Yu. A piece of complicated heavenly book text appeared before his eyes. Su Yu swept his gaze over them and discovered that he knew all of them. After experiencing the heavenly script several times, he had already mastered more rare heavenly script based on his previous foundation. Yun Yazi's eyes were filled with admiration. "You recognize all of them. That's unexpected. It seems like you've come into contact with a lot of heavenly script characters later on." Su Yu nodded. He had long suspected that Yun Yazi had held back on the heavenly book characters that he had imparted to him. Now it seemed that it was true. "Since that's the case, it's time for me to pass on the remaining forbidden chapters to you." Yun Yazi made his decision. He put his finger on the tip of his eyebrow and pulled out a piece of soul memory from his mind. Then it shot into Su Yu's body. All of a sudden, a chapter called the Heavenly Book of Darkness appeared in Su Yu's mind. What was recorded on it was actually how to use the Heavenly Book characters to unleash various defensive or offensive secret skills. Before this, the words of the Heavenly Book were merely a storage of knowledge for Su Yu. He took a closer look and was surprised to find that it had the Heavenly Prison Isolation method that the martial arts temple had once set up. He used a portion of the Heavenly Book's words to scatter in the surroundings, forming the strongest defense in the world. Not only could it injure the enemy, but it could also wake him up. Apart from that, Suyu also vaguely saw some secret techniques similar to the sound of death of the soul. It was described that as long as it was used properly, the power of the heavenly book's words could be stimulated to the point where the words could kill. The martial arts temple boasted of their talent and created their own sound of death. In truth, it was just something he had learned from the Tome of Darkness and modified slightly. Moreover, perhaps the martial arts temple had a limited number of chapters. As a result, the casting process was very slow, and someone had to delay the enemy. The drawbacks were very serious. On the other hand, the Tome of Darkness could be used instantaneously as long as it was used properly. "Master, what is this?" Suyu asked in surprise. What he saw just now was only the first part of the chapter, the most superficial secret technique. The secret technique at the back was getting more and more profound, even with a hint of evil. Yun Yazi had a complicated look on his face. "This book comes from the Holy Mountain. You can use it, but don't delve too deeply into it." His eyes were filled with deep fear and solemnity. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. From the Holy Mountain? Who wrote it? Was it the stone-birthed son of heaven? "You should study it seriously," Yun Yazi said. "Besides, there are only 5 years left before the restart of the era. You should find a place to stay as soon as possible." After saying that, Yun Yazi's aura soared, and he was ready to fly away. Suyu hurriedly said, "Take care, master. You too? We'll meet again in the new era." Yun Yazi looked deeply at Suyu and stepped out of the region with a smile. Suyu watched him leave, but his heart couldn't calm down for a long time. The 9th realm, the Tome of Darkness. After Yun Yazi woke up, he brought more mysteries to Suyu. Looking at the broken soul realm, Suyu recalled what Yun Yazi had said. The 8-star civilization was the last isolated island. Thinking of that, he set off for the life realm. What he saw was a realm of withering life, a realm of dead silence. In the life realm, only wastelands were left. Taking another step forward, what came into view was the death realm. If the life realm was a wasteland, then there was nothing in the death realm. The entire realm was destroyed to the point where not even a speck of dust was left. The defensive formation below was in a vacuum state. It had been completely destroyed. The death realm completely destroyed. So you set off for the next realm. But without exception, all of them were destroyed. The 3 realms of reincarnation, fate, and creation have all been destroyed. So you stood in a vast void, horrified. The incomparably huge 8-star civilization. In the end, only a small remnant of the southern world of dreams in the time realm was left. Half of the soul realm remained. The life in the life realm was destroyed, but the continent was still there. The rest of the land was completely destroyed. If the era was destroyed without the defensive formation, how could they resist? There was not much time left. Only 5 years left. A short 5 years. He had to take action. Otherwise, his lover, his daughter, all his friends, and all his old friends would be annihilated in the dust of history. He looked back at the remaining life realm and half of the soul realm. So he took a deep breath. Space transfer. With the transfer, the entire vast life realm was constantly moving. A year passed. There was a loud bang. The life realm and half of the soul realm were connected. Another year passed. The 2 connected realms were finally connected with the remaining time realm. The remnants of the defense formation were also moved over. Suyu pulled the defensive formation and weaved it into a giant net, wrapping the realms that had been reconnected. It took a whole 2 years. Suyu looked up again. His face slowly sank. The holy mountain was getting closer and closer. A patch of dim yellow light illuminated half of the void with a yellowish hue. Moreover, there was a trace of scorching air that came one step ahead of him. It was hard to imagine. When the holy mountain completely descended, what would happen to the 8-star civilization? The continent in front of him was the last space for the 8-star civilization. There would be no other place to live. After doing all this, Suyu finally had time to return to the Empress Hall. As soon as he returned, a fragrant wind hit him, accompanied by a clear call, "Brother." It was the descendants of the Star Rain Empress and several other Time Masters. "You are still alive." Suyu breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 2743. Unfortunately, it seemed that it was already too late. They did not succeed. Hearing this, Empress Star Rain's small face dimmed, and she said, "I've tried my best, but it's hard to stop them. They still didn't listen to our persuasion." Suyu patted her shoulder and said, "It doesn't matter. We just need to protect ourselves. You have already done your best." Only then did Empress Star Rain feel a little better. Suddenly, Empress Star Rain said, "Right, I saw Kai. Where is it?" Suyu asked immediately. The rest of the domains had already been destroyed, so it was best that Suker did not encounter any danger. Death Domain. Over there? Suyu immediately scanned the area that he had pieced together. In the end, he did not find any trace of Su Kai. Empress Star Rain couldn't help but get nervous. "Is Kai back?" "No," Suyu said, "but she is fine." Suyu had Kai-er's life jade plate with him. If something had happened to her, her life tablet would have shattered long ago. A hint of worry appeared between his brows. If Su Kai-er wasn't in the splicing domain, where could she be? The other domains had already been destroyed. Husband. When Qin Xianer sensed Su Yu's return, she immediately rushed over and threw herself into his embrace. Su Yu hugged her tightly. As he gazed at her beautiful face, he felt a pang of pain in his heart. "It must have been hard on you when I was away, right?" The time domain that had suffered a great calamity had many matters to handle. After he left, Qin Xianer was left to support him alone. He would be lying if he said he wasn't tired. "No matter how tired I am, how can I be more tired than you?" Qin Xianer touched Su Yu's cheek and said softly, "It's all thanks to you, my husband, that the three realms were able to provide the last resting place for all living beings. After a great battle, more than half of the creatures of the 8-star civilizations were killed. The rest were all concentrated in the small patchwork domain. By the way, has the organization I founded moved here?" Qin Xianer nodded. "We moved here a long time ago. Do you need to see them?" Suyu thought for a moment and nodded. "Yes. Many creatures are gathered in this patchwork domain. It's inevitable that there will be many disputes. We need someone reliable to manage them. Very soon." Empress Hall. Suyu saw the cauldron that he hadn't seen for a long time. "Greetings, Cauldron Master." Many experts stepped forward to pay their respects. Among them were many people Suyu was familiar with. For example, Deputy Cauldron Venerable Dark King, Snow Swordsman, Dead Soulworm. However, most of them were strong men whom Suyu was unfamiliar with. These were all cores that the cauldron had absorbed over the years. Of course, there was also a special existence among them. Meng Ku. "You've worked hard all these years," Suyu said with a smile as he looked at them. The cauldron might be very weak. However, they were all people that Suyu could trust, which was extremely rare. With Venerable Cauldron's fame, everything went smoothly for us. "It wasn't hard at all," King of Darkness said. He sighed in his heart. Back then, that puny human did not even dare to touch the Emperor Killing Sword. Now, however, he had grown into an existence that could suppress even hegemons. It was unbelievable. After that, Suyu listened to their reports. He then gave them many resources to distribute to the members of the cauldron. "Fine, you can all leave," Suyu said. The members of the cauldron left one after another. However, Suyu said, "Meng Kur, stay behind." Meng Kur's soft body trembled and stopped. She slowly turned around and bowed slightly. "Father." Suyu wore a faint smile. "Father? Since you have woken up, why bother calling me father?" Back then, Meng Kur had been smashed by Suyu, and she had been smashed silly. She had always regarded Suyu as her father. Now 100 years had passed. The injuries left by Meng Kur had long since healed. How could Suyu not be able to see this? Meng Kur bit her lips, her face was pale, and her eyes were full of determination. "What do you want? Just say it." Suyu walked down from the throne, patted her on the shoulder, and said, "Since you're already a member of my cauldron, of course, I won't do anything to you. Is that so?" Meng Kur was surprised. Did Suyu not want to kill her? Now he could kill her several times with just a look. "I want to ask you a question," Suyu said. Meng Kur said, "Go ahead. I want to know, what kind of existence is nirvana?" Suyu's eyes were full of confusion. From a moment, he stepped into the great beginning realm. A Star Alliance Chamber of Commerce. A nirvana. It was everywhere, filling every corner. But it was very strange. After the destruction of the 8-star civilization, the two great hidden forces completely concealed themselves and disappeared without a trace. Meng Kur sighed. I knew you would ask me, but unfortunately, my knowledge is very limited. I am just a minor character in Nirvana, placed in Luo Ho's body to conduct experiments, Meng Kur said. How could Suyu forget what happened to Luo Ho? He and the others were captured by Meng Kur and transformed. Many of the captured people were thrown into a pool of mysterious liquid and melted on the spot. Only a lucky person like Suyu had managed to survive and obtain some special talents. What kind of experiment is that? Meng Kur shook her head. I'm not sure. I only know that through experiments, people with special talents are selected and cultivated into the power of Nirvana. After all, her level was too low, and her knowledge was very limited. Suyu was increasingly puzzled. Experiments. Nirvana remembered that in the Dark Star civilization, Nirvana developed a moon-worshipping cult. They constantly absorbed the faith of the followers and took the opportunity to absorb their soul strength. Was that also one of Nirvana's experiments? What is Nirvana trying to do? Suyu's mind was a little confused. He remembered that he had once encountered a planet with a mecha civilization in the outer realm. That planet was enveloped by a mysterious force. Could it be that it was also an experimental planet? But was it an experimental planet for Nirvana, or did it belong to other forces? He shook his head, temporarily putting aside these clueless thoughts. All right, you may leave, Suyu said. After waiting for her to leave, Suyu formed a seal with both hands and summoned his future incarnation again. Although it had been destroyed by the soul death sound last time, it was after all just an incarnation. It could be summoned again from another time and space. How was the restoration of the nightmare crossing Lotus going? The future incarnation nodded. It will be successful in a year. A year later. That should be enough. If the broken defense formation could not withstand the destruction of the world, then the nightmare crossing Lotus was their only way out. He looked at the sky, which was getting closer and closer to the holy mountain. Suyu involuntarily flipped through the Book of Darkness. It would be best if he could master some secret techniques before the destruction of the world began. But at that moment, a beeping sound came from his body. Suyu took it out and frowned. It was Yenran's distress signal. Yenran had mastered all the space bloodlines of the Space Master. Chapter 2744. Could it be the people from the martial arts temple? Now that he thought about it, it seemed that they were the only ones who were particularly interested in the Sovereign Lord's bloodline. Thinking of this, how could Suyu dare to stay any longer? He teleported away and left a message in the remnant domain. Be on full alert. He was a little worried that the other party was luring him away. Qin Sienna nodded. She immediately deployed experts from all over to guard the remnant domain. They were determined not to let anyone pass through the defensive formation. For this, she, the three protectors, Emperor Star Rain, and the others were all on guard. Suyu's body flickered, and he quickly arrived at the place where Yenran had asked for help. To Suyu's surprise, this place was not a ruined domain. Instead, it was in the vast void. Why would Yenran appear here? He stood at the place where Yenran had sent out the distress signal and gently waved his hand in the air. An image appeared and continued to flow backwards. Yenran walked out of the remnant domain with a confused expression and came to this place. An audience with a former descendant of the chief sovereign of space. So this was how she was tricked out. Then, the descendant of the space dominus used a spatial magic treasure to teleport a golden carriage over. The golden palanquin released a powerful force that instantly sucked Yenran in. Yenran, who had a spatial bloodline, was unable to escape. He only had time to send out a distress signal. A golden palanquin? Suyu's eyes shone with a cold light. He remembered when the Phoenix King had attacked the divine capital in the space domain. He had seen a palanquin flash by. However, no matter who the other party was, since they were on the same side as the martial arts temple, they were his enemies. Schwa. Suyu used the space domain and immediately chased after him. 1 month later, in the distance, Suyu saw a golden palanquin speeding through the void. Freeze! He activated the elemental time domain and the sky on the other side froze. The golden palanquin immediately stopped. Suyu took a step forward and arrived in front of the golden carriage. However, he did not rush forward recklessly. There were already too many precedents of people breaking free from the freeze of time. He naturally did not dare to be careless. From afar, Suyu took out the divine nine-dragon cauldron, turned it into a fragmentary shadow, and struck it fiercely. Just as they were about to collide, the golden palanquin, which was clearly frozen in place, suddenly moved. Moreover, a boundless purple air current gushed out of the sedan chair, which forcefully pushed the divine nine-dragon cauldron back. If that purple air current sprayed onto a human body, the consequences could be imagined. As expected, he's pretending to be frozen. Suyu said coldly, "If you want to ambush me with such a small trick, then you are really underestimating me." A moon rose above his head, illuminated by the soul light. No matter how tight the golden palanquin was, no matter how powerful the restrictions were, they were still penetrated. Suyu could vaguely see the scene inside. He saw a slender girl with a veil covering her face sitting coldly inside. In front of him was an unconscious woman. It was Yinran. The woman raised her head, as if sensing that she had been seen through. She sighed softly and walked out of the sedan chair. She stared at Suyu silently. "Servant, you have mastered another Origin Realm technique. How troublesome." Suyu looked at her coldly. This woman gave him a very dangerous feeling. Or rather, they shared the same origin. "Who are you?" Suyu asked. The woman said indifferently, "Me? If you want, you can call me Master." "Master?" Suyu laughed. He had never been a slave in his life, so how could he have a master? However, the next moment, Suyu's expression changed slightly. The woman weaved signs with her hands, and the signs changed rapidly. The divine nine-dragon cauldron in Suyu's hands trembled slightly, as if it was about to obey her control. If the divine nine-dragon cauldron had not been in Suyu's hands for so many years, it would have been extremely sturdy. Just now, this woman had already snatched the divine nine-dragon cauldron. "You are the successor of the ancient god, Jiulong?" Suyu asked seriously. The woman stopped making signs and sighed with slight disappointment. "The divine nine-dragon cauldron has been in your hands for too long. What a pity." She looked at Suyu again and said, "Since you know who I am, you can call me Master now." She looked at Suyu with a condescending gaze from the beginning to the end. It was as if Suyu was born to be a head lower than her. Suyu was surprised. However, he already knew about the existence of the successor of the ancient god Jiulong, so he was not overly surprised. "So, you are the successor of the ancient god Jiulong," Suyu said calmly. Suyu said calmly, "For the sake of the ancient god Jiulong, let go of my person, and you can leave with your own life." No matter what, he had relied on the ancient god Jiulong's small cauldron to get to where he was today. Suyu probably could not bring himself to kill the successor of the ancient god Jiulong. "You think too much. A servant has no right to bargain with a master," the woman said indifferently. Suyu raised his eyebrows, his face cold. "Stop calling me a servant. Do I owe you anything?" Suyu did not care, and his murderous aura was released naturally. "Don't challenge my patience. Let go of her." If she was stubborn, what was wrong with killing her? The woman shook her head. "A servant who challenges a master never has a good ending. Are you sure you want to be my enemy?" Suyu said coldly, "Ignorant woman." With a wave of his palm, the three Yuanjie domains of time, soul, and life appeared at the same time. "Soul deprivation," Suyu said calmly. The woman calmly weaved signs in front of her, which were all mysterious signs used to control the divine nine-dragon cauldron. The divine nine-dragon cauldron, formed by the interweaving traces of the signs, appeared before her eyes. Suyu saw it clearly. That was the purest way to control the divine nine-dragon cauldron. "Nine-dragon roar," the woman said indifferently. All of a sudden, the divine nine-dragon cauldron, formed by the traces, spun and rushed towards Suyu. Space-time shift. Suyu stood where he was, not dodging. He knew that the rotating attack of the divine nine-dragon cauldron could not be successfully avoided by dodging. In an instant, the space-time light pulled the divine nine-dragon cauldron away. The traces that formed the divine nine-dragon cauldron collapsed immediately, and soon, the shape of the divine nine-dragon cauldron was no longer there. But what was even more bizarre was those traces broke through the restraints of space-time and lashed toward Suyu. Without hesitation, the real divine nine-dragon cauldron in Suyu's hand spun and flew up, slapping away the traces. "How about it, servant? Do you still have the courage to challenge me?" the woman said indifferently. Suyu retrieved the divine nine-dragon cauldron and said calmly, "I said, ignorant." As soon as he finished speaking, a large black shadow suddenly appeared under the woman's feet, instantly entangling her hands and feet. The woman was not flustered at first. She said calmly, "One of the two great secret techniques of the Soul Dominator, Soul Shadow Technique." She lowered her head to take a look, and two dragon-shaped flames shot out her eyes. The large black shadow was immediately incinerated into nothingness. Chapter 2745. The words of the heavenly book, which were emitting golden light, surrounded Suyu. The sound of death of the soul? The woman was surprised, but then she was at a loss. "Did you steal it from the Martial Way Temple?" Suyu quickly finished the incantation, stared at the woman, and said indifferently, "Open your dog eyes and see what this is." This was the simplest secret technique of the Book of Darkness, the sound of death of the soul. It was worlds apart from the low-level version of the Martial Way Temple. Swoosh! As soon as he said that, countless heavenly words shot toward her. The woman once again traced the path of the divine nine-dragon cauldron, trying to block the heavenly words. However, in front of the heavenly book's words, the traces that were outlined were like pieces of paper, completely crushed. At this moment, she finally changed her expression and hurriedly crawled back into the sedan. Poof! Unfortunately, the golden sedan did not resist for long before it was smashed into pieces by the heavenly words. The woman escaped in a panic. She looked at the heavenly book words that filled her eyes, and a look of horror appeared on her face. Trembling with fear, she anxiously shouted, "Quickly save me!" Like the Martial Way Temple, she took out an ancient sword and stabbed it into the sky. A beam of light fell and swept her away. Before she left, she glanced at the unconscious Yanran and grabbed her as well. However, how could Suyu allow her to take Yanran away? With a fierce grasp of his palm, the flying heavenly words condensed into a sword of words. The sword slashed forward. Without any sword energy, the woman's arm was cut off at the shoulder. The woman screamed in pain and tried to recover her arm. At her level, there was almost no injury that could not be healed. But the strange thing was there were a few remaining words on her severed arm, like a seal, making it difficult for her shoulder to recover. "Ah, my arm!" The woman screamed as she was completely swept away. Suyu stared in the direction of the light beam. It was this thing again. Where did the Martial Way Temple and the woman come from? What was that force? Having no time to care about her, Suyu immediately checked on Yinran's condition. Fortunately, the space bloodline in her body had not been extracted. Suyu gently touched her brow, waking her up. As soon as she woke up, she subconsciously resisted and used the space domain to escape. "Where are we going?" It was only when Suyu's voice reached her ears that Yinran finally realized where she was going. She immediately stopped and looked at Suyu, crying tears of joy. "I almost thought that I was going to die here." The woman in the palanquin coveted her bloodline. The way they looked at her was like that of a pig or a dog. She had no doubt that once her bloodline was extracted, she would definitely be killed. Yes, they were killed without hesitation. Woo-woo, she could not help but sob in fear. In fact, this was not the first time she had been attacked. Before this, there had been several small attacks, but she had been alerted and escaped. However, the enemies that came this time were too strong, and they directly captured her. When Yinran first obtained the space bloodline, she was extremely excited. But after obtaining it, not only did it not bring her enough benefits, but it also plunged her into deep danger. So you had saved her this time, but what about the next time? What about the next time? This mysterious and powerful enemy was simply too much. It was not something that a Xiandao master could defend against. Suyu, I don't want a space bloodline anymore, okay? Yinran made up her mind painfully. Suyu was silent for a long time. Think carefully. Once you take it away, you will never be able to become the space master again. She was now at the peak of the high-level space domain. If she worked hard for a while, she might be able to reach the Yuan level and become the new space master. No, I don't want it anymore, Yinran said firmly. If this were to continue, she couldn't guarantee that she would be able to survive. Suyu nodded. Fine, I will take back the space master's bloodline. With Yinran's cooperation, Suyu covered her head with his palm and began to extract the space master's bloodline. A moment later, there was a string of crystals in his palm. Yinran revealed a relaxed expression. We are finally free. Next, Suyu brought Yinran back to the ruined area. He returned to the secret room and immediately began to refine the space master's bloodline. With exquisite Xuanji's help, fusing with the bloodline was extremely easy. In a short while, he successfully fused the soul into his body. At this point, Suyu had already mastered 4 Yuan-level domains. They were time, space, soul, and life. If he encountered the Martial Way Temple again, he would not need to use the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations to compete with them. However, Suyu felt that the biggest gain was the Tome of Darkness. He had simply tested the soul-destroying sound just now and was very satisfied with its power. Suyu had never officially cultivated the soul-extinguishing sound before. He had just tried it out. He did not expect its power to be so amazing. The practice was already so terrifying. How powerful would it be if it was completed? Thinking of this, Suyu activated the Yuan level time domain and accelerated time to the extreme. He studied the Tome of Darkness diligently. 2 years passed. The sky above the entire 8-star civilization had been replaced by a dim yellow. The dazzling yellow sunlight kept the 8-star civilization in an oppressive dim yellow for a long time. At the same time, the 8-star civilization's spirit energy, Xian energy, and Taoist energy were all flowing to the outside world at an alarming rate. It was due to the invisible oppression that caused the atmosphere to change automatically. Moreover, the spiritual veins of the mountains and rivers began to dry up. Countless treasures of heaven and earth were declining. Countless creatures were lying listlessly on the ground, as if they had accepted their fate and were waiting for their fate to come. The entire 8-star civilization was shrouded in a desperate and depressing atmosphere. The arrival of the end of the world caused people's hearts to change dramatically. They began to indulge, do whatever they wanted, and enjoy the only time left in their lives. Therefore, public security deteriorated rapidly. Fortunately, Suyu had the foresight to arrange for the Cauldron to take over the remnant domain, which stabilized the order. But even so, the depression of the people could not be relieved. Qin Xiener sat in the courtyard, practicing the divine fire from the ancient god of Jiuyo. She looked at the sky from time to time, and her eyebrows were full of worry. I wonder where Kai is. Is it safe there? Can we avoid the destruction of the era? Once the destruction of the era began, it would not only affect the remnants. Everything in the void would not be able to escape. At this moment, in the secret room where Suyu was, an extremely dangerous breath suddenly broke out. Qin Xiener immediately looked back, but the dangerous breath flashed. What is my husband doing again? Qin Xiener wondered. She did not know that the secret room where Suyu was at this moment was like a horrible scene from hell. The secret room had turned into a sea of blood. That was one of the forbidden secret techniques of the Tome of Darkness, the boundless sea of blood. Once it was performed, the creatures who fell into it would be melted into a pool of blood. There were no exceptions. Even a master of the heaven law. Suyu floated above the sea of blood, with a trace of fear on his face. Chapter 2746. And this was only the slightly more profound part of the Tome of Darkness. There were even more forbidden secret techniques in it. Once used, the power would be even more terrifying. He wondered how much Yin Yazi had mastered. Why had he never used it before? When the sinful lady chased after him, it was a desperate situation, but Yin Yazi had never used it. Could it be that he didn't train himself? Suyu thought to himself. While he was thinking, Qin Sienna knocked on the door. "Husband, are you okay?" Suyu opened the door and looked at Qin Sienna, who had a worried look on her face. He smiled and said, "I'm fine." After thinking for a while, Suyu said, "Close your eyes, and I will give you a gift." "A gift?" Qin Sienna's crystal eyes were full of expectation, and she closed her eyes obediently. Suyu lowered his head and kissed her forehead. His lips wriggled gently, and golden words came out one after another. Qin Sienna opened her eyes in amusement. "Is this a gift?" It was just a kiss, wasn't it? But she liked it very much. However, Suyu kissed her for a long time before he slowly stopped. "Roll up your sleeves and have a look," Suyu said with a faint smile. "What for?" Qin Sienna was a little confused. She rolled up her sleeves and was surprised. "What is this?" On her jade-like snow-white skin, there were strange golden words flashing. Every word seemed to have a spirit of its own as it continuously moved around its body. "This is a protection spell." Suyu's fingers gently touched Qin Sienna's arm. Suddenly, the words of the heavenly book on it burst out with golden light, and Suyu's fingers fiercely bounced off. "The stronger the power that attacks you, the stronger the rebound," Suyu said. Suyu said, "Unless the demon emperor-level existences come in person, it will be difficult for the strong ones below them to hurt you." Qin Sienna said incredulously, "There is such a powerful protection spell?" She thought about it and rolled up Suyu's sleeves. There were no similar words on his skin. "If it is so powerful, why don't you have it?" Qin Sienna asked suspiciously. Suyu smiled. "Because I don't need it. Today, there is nothing in the 8-star civilization that can hurt me." In the past, Qin Sienna might have foolishly believed this explanation. But now, she shook her head, hugged Suyu's waist, and leaned her head against his chest. "Brother Suyu, there's only one protective spell, so you gave it to me, and not to yourself, didn't you?" Suyu's smile froze for a moment. He patted her back helplessly and asked softly, "Do you know where I'm the weakest?" Qin Sienna blushed and said embarrassedly, "Are you talking about me? Wasn't she Suyu's greatest weakness?" The Time Master had subdued Su Kai, and forced Suyu to dig out his own heart. Not to mention her, if one day she was coerced or even killed. It was hard to imagine whether Suyu would go crazy. "How could it be you? The most important thing to me is, of course, my heart. Are you stupid?" Suyu poked her forehead. Qin Sienna's face stiffened, and she looked embarrassed. In the end, it was just her wishful thinking. She angrily loosened her embrace, turned around, and ignored Suyu. Suyu was right. The most important thing to her was, of course, his heart. But couldn't he coax her a little? Why did he have to say it so bluntly? Suyu pulled her into his embrace once again from behind, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. "But Sienna is my heart, my most precious heart." Qin Sienna understood, and her face flushed. She looked around quickly and found that the servants in the distance were covering their mouths and laughing, and her face became even redder. She turned around and muttered resentfully, "Why are you so mushy? Aren't you ashamed?" But she was very happy in her heart. It was as if she had eaten honey. Hee. Suyu lifted her snow-white chin and said, "We are an old couple, so what is there to be ashamed of?" Suyu bent down and carried Qin Sienna in his arms. "Oh, what are you doing?" Qin Sienna's heart was thumping. Of course it's between husband and wife. Suyu deliberately showed an evil smile, and while she resisted, he carried her into the secret room. After a long time, Qin Sienna walked out, a little exhausted, and her beautiful eyes were filled with faint resentment. "Really, I am exhausted every time." Suyu tidied his clothes and smiled without saying anything. The era was about to be destroyed. Everyone was anxious. How could Qin Sienna be no exception? Everything he said and did was to soothe Qin Sienna's mood. Of course, it was also to soothe his own mood. What would the scene be like when the era was destroyed? Could the broken Great Formation defend? Would they be reduced to dust in the destruction of the era? Or would they continue to live on in the next era? Everything was unknown. Even Suyu had no confidence at all. After sending Qin Sienna away, Suyu went back to rest. Suyu looked at the sky and in a flash, he came out of the Great Formation. What he could do now was to rearrange some heavenly book characters outside the Great Formation with a book of darkness that he had mastered. But just as he was about to start, suddenly, he felt several auras approaching. His eyes narrowed, and he stared into the distance. Gradually, a cloud was reflected in his eyes. On the cloud, there were several figures that Suyu had seen before. One of them was the deputy courtmaster of the heavenly court, Jean Fian. "Oh, holy body, Su, I haven't seen you in years. It's been a long time." Jean Fian's white robe fluttered in the wind, looking like an immortal. But Suyu had long known that they had always coveted Suyu's divine nine-dragon cauldron. His face was indifferent. "What do you want from me?" Jean Fian smiled and said, "Holy body, Su, 1 year from now will be the day of the destruction of the era. We sincerely invite you to go to the heavenly court to discuss the great plan." Discuss the great plan again? Wasn't their plan to trick Suyu into going to the heavenly court and then snatch the divine nine-dragon cauldron? For this, Suyu had been holding back the holy body. He had always kept it as a trump card, lest they find out. "I'm a little busy now. I'm afraid I have no time to go," Suyu refused without thinking. The young men behind Jean Fian were secretly annoyed. What the hell, we invited him personally, and he's still shy. What a shameless bastard. We shouldn't have come here. Our warm faces were met with cold butts. Little did they know, their thoughts were all in Suyu's mind. Jean Fian was still smiling. He looked at the broken great formation, shook his head, and said with a smile, "If holy body Su wants to rely on the broken great formation of the ancient gods to resist the destruction of the era, then I can only say that holy body Su is going to be very disappointed." Suyu stopped and listened to him quietly. Chapter 2747. Holy Physique Su, there's a very precious video here. Maybe you'll be interested. Jean Fian took out a very old and broken piece of jade. There was a video engraved inside. "What is this?" Suyu asked. Jean Fian smiled slightly. "A video left behind from the destruction of the last era. It was found in the Tao Abyss. It should be the only one of its kind." Suyu was shocked. Left behind from the destruction of the last era? He took it and probed it with his soul. What he saw was a very blurry image. It was probably because it was too far away and had existed for a long time. During the preservation process, it was inevitable that the image would be damaged. In the blurry image, there was a world of nothingness as dark as ink. Dazzling, shining islands were suspended in the world of nothingness. The shape of one of the islands was exactly the same as a complete 8-star civilization. Suyu's mind roared. Was the island that Yun Yazi mentioned referring to the 8-star civilization? Were there many islands similar to the 8-star civilization before the destruction of the last era? As far as the eye could see, there were countless islands similar to the 8-star civilization. Among them, the 8-star civilization could only be regarded as a drop in the ocean. All of a sudden, the world suddenly turned yellow. A golden island descended from the sky. On the island, there were 10 majestic and solemn stone men. Against the golden light, their shadows were elongated, shrouding all the islands. Then, the golden island suddenly shone with golden light, releasing rays of golden light. The golden light swept in all directions, covering every corner of the nothingness. Under the sweep of the golden light, all the islands were instantly crushed into dust. After a cup of tea, many islands were wiped out. Only a few islands remained. On each island, there was an incomparably majestic figure standing on it. They blocked the destructive golden light. One of them stood on the island where the 8-star civilization was. That indomitable and imposing figure that looked down on the holy mountain. It was no one else. It was the human ancestor. It went without saying who the other 8 were. The 8 divine ancestors. The 9 divine ancestors, led by the human ancestor, were forced into a desperate situation and attacked the holy mountain together. In the great war of destruction, the other 8 islands were all destroyed. Only the 8-star civilization was left alone in the galaxy. The video ended abruptly. However, Su was unable to calm down for a long time. Holy Physique Su, Do you still have the confidence to protect this broken island by yourself? Jean Fien asked. The answer, of course, was no. Su Yu's sacred mortal body had yet to reach the upper tier. No matter how strong he was, could he be stronger than the 9 sacred ancestors? However, they, along with the island they were protecting, had been annihilated in the end of the era. If the end of an era really came, no one on the island of an 8-star civilization would be spared. His most beloved Sien, him, and the 8-star civilization would all draw a full stop at the end of the era. What about your heavenly court? Do you have the confidence to survive this disaster? Su Yu asked. It was strange. The 8-star civilization had been shattered to this extent, but they did not even see the shadow of the heavenly court. Us. Jean Fien chuckled. This is the reason why I invited Divine Body Su. You will understand everything after you visit the heavenly court. After a pause, Jean Fien continued. If Sacred Physique Su needs it, we will provide the necessary assistance to help everyone overcome the crisis of world destruction. Su Yu was silent. After a long time, he nodded slightly. Okay, I could take a look at the heavenly court, but wait for me. Jean Fien's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness, but she smiled enthusiastically. Of course. Su Yu immediately returned to the remnant domain and sent a message to all the high-level officials, including Qin Xiener. During his absence, he must strengthen the security. Whoosh! Just as he was about to leave, Yu Xiongwan chased after him. Brother Su, are you going to the heavenly court? Yes. Su Yu looked at him and asked, Do you want to go too? Yu Xiongwan's identity was different from Su Yu and Qin Xiener. He was a descendant of the ancient god corpse ancestor. In theory, he was a member of the heavenly court. However, for some unknown reason, he was stranded in the outside world. Yes, I want to go and have a look. Yu Xiongwan nodded deeply, with a hint of expectation in his eyes. With Su Yu's help, he had regained the sacred artifact of the ancient god corpse ancestor. However, he lacked a lot of information about the ancient god corpse ancestor. This trip to the heavenly court might be able to find a lot of records of the ancient god corpse ancestor, which would help him obtain the complete inheritance. Su Yu warned, this trip to the heavenly court will not be peaceful. Are you sure you want to go? Go. I also want to do my part for the remnant region. If I can master more powerful strength, I may be able to help when the era is destroyed. Yu Xiongwan said affirmatively. After thinking for a long time, Su Yu nodded. Be careful. I understand. Yu Xiongwan nodded heavily. The two immediately set off and went to the outside world. When Jean Fien saw Su Yu brought a stranger, he couldn't help but be surprised. This is? Yu Xiongwan took out the scepter without saying a word. Seeing this object, Jean Fien was taken aback. The sacred artifact scepter of the ancient god corpse ancestor? The young people behind him were also shocked. Who is this guy? Where did he find the sacred artifact of the ancient god corpse ancestor? Could it be that he stole it like Su Yu? Su Yu frowned slightly. These people of the heavenly court have a strong sense of superiority, don't they? How could they say that others stole it? Yu Xiongwan's eyes turned azure blue, and he said lightly, Is there anything else you want to ask? Seeing this pair of eyes, Jean Fien was completely moved. The descendant of the ancient god corpse ancestor? Immediately, his face was full of smiles, and he said 3 words in a row, Good, good, good. In the heavenly court, there is only the descendant of the ancient god corpse ancestor. If you return, it will definitely cause a stir in the heavenly court. With that, Jean Fien took the lead and jumped onto the red cloud and waved. Come, let me show you the heritage of the heavenly court. Su Yu and Yu Xiongwan jumped on it. Following the red cloud, they went deeper into the outer world. After a long time, this place was already far away from the broken domain. Not far away, they could even see a long crack in the depths of the dark void. Like an abyss, it devoured everything from the great beginning realm. That must be the Tao Abyss, right? However, it didn't seem far. In fact, it was incomparably far. Even if Su Yu used all his strength, he didn't know how many years it would take to get there. 1 month later, they had reached the deepest part of the void. This place was almost the edge of the great beginning realm. Suddenly, Their eyes lit up. In the depths of the darkness, there was some faint silver light flashing faintly. They fixed their eyes on it. It turned out to be a silver-white, incomparably huge spaceship. The size of the spaceship was not the least bit smaller than the current broken domain. However, the hull was engraved with tens of thousands of heavenly book characters. Chapter 2748. The power was so strong that it could completely resist the destructive golden light. So he was shocked. He was not shocked by the words of the heavenly book. He knew all these words. He was surprised by the unknown liquid. It was similar to the pulse-cleansing divine spring used by the descendants of the masters. The difference was the liquid energy was extremely domineering. Combined with the words of the heavenly book, it released an extraordinary defensive power. If I can get my hands on that liquid, I can also set up such a great formation, Suyu thought to himself. The clouds flew and landed on the incomparably huge spaceship. As they approached, Suyu also found that the spaceship was equipped with tens of thousands of seven-star cannons. Those were seven-star cannons. The sinful lady was a powerful figure, but the nirvana artifact in her hands was only 8-star. Such an arrangement showed how powerful they were. No matter how many heavenly law masters attacked, they were annihilated. However, Suyu did not quite understand why the heavenly court had been suppressed by the 8-star civilizations for so long if they had such powerful combat power. With this invincible spaceship, they should have been able to capture all the 8 masters in one fell swoop. There was only one explanation. The spaceship was only recently armed. Some extremely powerful expert equipped them with giant cannons and left behind a huge defense with the words of the heavenly book. Who could that person be? Noticing Suyu's expression, Zhang Fian's eyes flashed with a touch of smugness. This is the heavenly court. The clouds were about to fall. They could see everything on the spaceship from above. The mountains were continuous and overflowing with spiritual energy. Human cities, demon territories, and all kinds of creatures were here. The most prominent should be the 9 huge mountains that looked like pillars supporting the sky. No matter where they were on the spaceship, they could see them. The vicinity of each mountain was extraordinarily prosperous. Many cities surrounded each mountain like stars surrounding the moon. One could vaguely see the transcendent status of the mountains. What is that? Yu Xiangwan looked at the huge mountain at the end of the line, her eyes filled with a touch of confusion. The underworld scepter in her hand also emitted a faint black light. It was actually responding on its own. Zhang Fian said with a smile, "That is the place where ancient God Corp's ancestor used to train. I will take you there later." His attitude toward Xiangwan was especially sincere. Oh, Yu Xiangwan's eyes were filled with anticipation. His intuition told him that ancient God Corp's ancestor's mountain contained a legacy that was extremely beneficial to him. Zhang Fian then looked at Suyu and smiled. "I will bring you to pay a visit to the master of the heavenly court." Suyu nodded slightly. Under his lead, they descended at the center of the 9 great mountains. That was the most prosperous place in the heavenly court. It even surpassed the 9 great mountains. In the central area, a floating golden island came into view. When Suyu saw the island, he almost mistook it for the sacred mountain. With his perception, countless lines that were invisible to the naked eye extended out from the sacred mountain and deeply embedded themselves into the spaceship. Through the lines, Golden Mountain controlled the entire spaceship. That's Mount Buzhou of the heavenly court. It's the core of the heavenly court. The higher-ups of the heavenly court are all there, Zhang Fian said. Once you're up there, make sure to keep a low profile. Don't make a ruckus, lest you draw the ire of others. So you did not take it seriously. Did he make it sound like he was begging to come here? Wasn't it because of their repeated invitations that he came? They landed on Mount Buzhou. From this, it could be seen that there were 9 huge caves on the mountain. One of the caves in the middle was extraordinarily magnificent, and it was faintly emitting a terrifying and tyrannical power. Zhang Fian lowered her voice and said, "This is the cave of the court master. There are 8 deputy court masters and 1 court master." He was just one of the 8 deputy court masters. His position was not high, but it was not low either. After saying that, Jean Fien bowed to the cave of the court-master and said solemnly, "Court-master, I have brought holy bodysuit here." There was silence in the cave of the court-master. There was no response. After a long time, Jean Fien said again, "Court-master, got it. Ask him to wait for a while." An indifferent voice came from the cave. Wait? Suyu was amused. Did the heavenly court really think that Suyu came to them on his own initiative? They had come all the way to invite him here. However, when he came, he was turned away at the door and asked him to wait. "No need. Court-master, please go about your business." "I will leave first," Suyu said decisively. Yu Xiangwan reached out to stop him and said in a low voice, "Brother Su, don't be impulsive." Suyu pointed at his own eyes. "Am I not calm enough?" His purpose of coming here was to see what was so special about the heavenly court. He had seen it just now. He could go back at any time now. As for the higher-ups of the heavenly court, it did not matter whether he saw them or not. Jean Fien's face changed slightly, and she looked sullen. "Holy bodysuit, what do you mean by this? I invited you here with good intentions, and you are leaving just like that?" Suyu looked at her indifferently and said, "I gave you face by coming to the heavenly court to see what you have done. How did you treat me?" He shook his head and was too lazy to talk nonsense. He turned and left. Just as he was about to soar into the sky, the space around him tightened, and his body was frozen. Young people nowadays have no patience at all. A hoarse voice came from the cave of the heavenly court. A hunchbacked old man with a walking stick walked out slowly. He had only one eye. It was an eye with 9 colors. He was the master of the heavenly court. "Come in." The master of the heavenly court looked at him condescendingly. Suyu said calmly, "How many times do I need to repeat the same words? I'm not interested in meeting the people of the heavenly court. Goodbye." He soared into the sky again. The master of the heavenly court raised his old eyebrows slowly and tapped the ground with the tip of his foot. The space around him tightened again. But this time, Suyu casually used the space domain. No matter how tight the space was, it did not affect him at all. Before leaving, Suyu looked at Yu Xiangwan and left silently. Yu Xiangwan was different from him. Suyu was not liked by the heavenly court, but Yu Xiangwan was different. If he stayed, it would only benefit her. "How dare you?" The master of the heavenly court was displeased. "The heavenly court specially invited you because you are the successor of the ancient god Jiolong. Why are you so ungrateful?" If Suyu did not know why they wanted the divine 9-dragon cauldron, he would have let it go. Even if he knew, there was no need to give him face. "I'm ungrateful, so what?" Suyu said coldly. If they wanted to sit down and talk, Suyu would still give them a chance. But their attitude towards Suyu was the same as the female descendant of the ancient god Jiolong, treating him like a servant. The master of the heavenly court stared at Suyu with his remaining eye. "Young man, let me give you a word of advice. The heavenly court is not a place where anyone can behave atrociously." "Huh?" Suyu sneered coldly. Since he had dared to come, he had expected to face hostility. Why would he be afraid? Is that so? I want to know where the heavenly court gets its sense of superiority. Suyu said indifferently. The people of the heavenly court probably did not know that Suyu could still use his sacred mortal body at any time. Chapter 2749. Not only could it be used at any time, but its power would also be stronger than before. The master of the heavenly court tapped the ground with his walking stick. Even his voice became stronger. "Then, let me teach you." The two of them were at daggers drawn. A fight was about to break out. One was the master of the heavenly court. The other was the sacred body of the human clan. Once the fight broke out, the surrounding area would be razed to the ground. Jean Fien hated Suyu, not the master of the heavenly court. How could he be so unappreciative? How could he confront the master of the heavenly court as soon as he arrived? It was a tense moment. A light chuckle came from the master of the heavenly court's cave. "Master, why are you so angry?" A man in fluttering white robes walked out of the cave. His appearance was ordinary, but his aura was extraordinary. His eyes were very deep. When he looked at people, he gave people a feeling of spring breeze. But when he looked at his eyes, he gave people a sense of coldness. Hearing that, the master of the heavenly court turned around and apologized. "I didn't expect to disturb Gongzi Jua." Everyone in the world had a name and a surname. This person was respected by the master of the heavenly court, so his status was extraordinary. However, he had no surname. He only used Gongzi instead of his surname, which gave people a sense of mystery. Gongzi Zhuo laughed softly, then cupped his fists at Su Yu and apologized. I was the one who pestered the court master, causing her to be unable to see you just now. As a result, she neglected you. If you want to blame someone, blame it on me. This person's words were very pleasing to the ear. But if one thought about it carefully, they would realize that he was helping the master of the heavenly court, blaming Su Yu for being too petty and not being generous enough. It had to be said that this person's art of language was brilliant. Su Yu said calmly, I think you'd better not interfere in the matter between me and the heavenly court. This person was respected by the master of the heavenly court, so he was most likely not from the heavenly court. Gongzi Zhuo was still smiling, and he said warmly, Sacred Body Su, can you give me some face and let it go for the time being? Or was he secretly blaming him? So you would not be allowed to leave even if you wanted to. Who was making things difficult for whom? Okay, then I will leave now. Can you tell the master of the heavenly court not to stop me? So you said coldly. As he spoke, he tore open space once more, preparing to leave. Gongzi Zhuo sighed helplessly. Sacred Physique Su, please don't be impatient. The Palace Lord and I were just discussing the Remnant Realms. For the sake of the Remnant Realms, shouldn't you calm down and listen to our discussion? Remnant Domain? Su Yu's gaze turned slightly. He did not feel that the Heavenly Court had any good intentions. Not long ago, the Heavenly Court's people had barged into the Remnant Realm to capture Yanran. However, there was no harm in listening. I won't go into the cavern. If you have anything to say, we can talk here, Su Yu said indifferently. Who knew if there were any traps in the cave? The court lord raised his eyebrows. His baleful aura was sinister, but Gongzi was secretly pressed down on him, telling him to calm down. All right, then we'll do as Sacred Physique Su says, young masters was said. The court lord waved his hand, ordering everyone to leave. Zhang Fian stared at Su Yu coldly. Then, she turned to Yu Xiangwan with a kind smile and said, Descendant of the ancient God Corpse ancestor, please come with me. I will take you to visit the place where the ancient God Corpse ancestor used to train. Yu Xiangwan looked at Su Yu worriedly. Brother Su, be careful. The group of people left. Su Yu stood in front of the two of them with his hands clasped behind his back. He said calmly, If you have anything to say, just say it. Gongzi Zhuo smiled and said, After all, the Remnant Realm is the last resting place for the creatures of the myriad realms. Therefore, I hope that the Remnant Realm can enter the Tao Abyss. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. The Tao Abyss. It was rumored that it was an extremely dangerous place. Even the ancient god, Jiolong, never returned. The Tao Abyss is one of the few places that can avoid the end of the era, Gongzi Zhuo said. I hope you understand this. Su Yu was deep in thought. It's not easy to enter the Tao Abyss, is it? Su Yu asked. If it was easy, why would the people of the Heavenly Court spend so much effort to build a spaceship? Why would they not all enter the Tao Abyss? Gongzi Zhuo nodded. Yes, there are many forbidden existences in the Tao Abyss. People from the outside world are not allowed to enter at will. However, if you can get the permission of those forbidden existences, it is not impossible to take refuge in it. So you heard the main point. How can we satisfy those forbidden existences? Su Yu asked. Gongzi Zhuo's smile deepened. They're only interested in a few things, such as the divine nine-dragon cauldron in your hands. Sure enough, his ultimate goal was still the divine nine-dragon cauldron. Su Yu did not refuse immediately. In his hands, the divine nine-dragon cauldron was no longer of much use, because he lacked the real control method of the ancient god Jiolong. The power of the divine nine-dragon cauldron was extremely weak. If he could use the divine nine-dragon cauldron to exchange for all the creatures in the remnant regions, for Siener, and for countless old friends to avoid the great calamity of the end of the world. So what if he gave it up? However, the other party was just talking. He could not believe it. Gongzi Zhuo took out a token. The words Gongzi Zhuo were carved on the back. The word ancestor was carved on the front. I am a descendant of the human ancestor. Can such an identity be trusted? Who? A descendant of the human ancestor? Su Yu's pupil shrank as he stared at Gong Zizhua. The human ancestor had descendants in the world? Gong Zizhua casually took back the token and said, although the ancestor perished, he placed all his descendants in the Tao abyss before he died to avoid the calamity. Now, seeing that the last island in the world is about to fall, I cannot bear to leave the Tao abyss and come to save you. If that was the case, it could be trusted. However, feeling the divine nine-dragon cauldron in his arms, Su Yu was reluctant to part with it. From the very beginning, the divine nine-dragon cauldron had been with him. It was the one that changed the course of his life. So you could not bear to give it away just like that. Holy Body Su, you don't have to answer me now. You can think about it for a while. However, you only have 3 days at most. After 3 days, I will return to the Tao abyss, Gong Zizhua said. Su Yu nodded. Yes, I need to calm down. This matter really needed to be considered carefully. Seeing him like this, the court master's face relaxed a lot. It would be great if he could take back the divine nine-dragon cauldron peacefully. Someone, send Holy Body Su to rest, he said. Su Yu waved his hand. No need. I will go and see Yu Xiangwan. The court master did not stop him. As long as Su Yu did not leave the heaven court, it did not matter if he wandered around. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Yu left in a flash. The court master's eyes flashed, and he lowered his voice. Gong Zizhua, are you really going to help all the creatures in the remnant regions enter the Tao abyss? It is very difficult. Gong Zizhua said calmly, it is indeed difficult, but since I said it, I will do it. After all, this person has some connection with my ancestor. The court master sighed with envy. The creatures in the remnant regions are really lucky to be able to hide in the Tao abyss, unlike us, who have to resist. Little did they know. Chapter 2750. Of course, it was Su Yu. However, when the soul power dissipated, the court master and Gong Zizhua looked at each other and smiled as they looked in the direction where the soul power had disappeared. Ha! You are quite cautious, Gong Zizhua said calmly. The court master laughed hoarsely. Unfortunately, it was all a clever trick. It turned out that the conversation between the two of them was deliberately meant to reassure Su Yu. After confirming that Su Yu's soul power had dissipated, the court master said, Gong Zizhua, why don't we just take the divine nine-dragon cauldron? He has lost his mortal body and is weak. Why do we need to deceive him? In his opinion, Su Yu did not have the ability to protect the divine nine-dragon cauldron. Gong Zizhua shook his head calmly. It is better to be safe than sorry. What if he really has some trump cards? So, let's deceive the divine nine-dragon cauldron. As for entering the Tao abyss in the future, I will find another reason, Gong Zizhua said. He didn't even need to find a reason. As long as he returned to the Tao abyss, what could Su Yu do to him? The court master laughed hoarsely and said disapprovingly, Isn't it just the 10,000 calamities scythe? If I met him alone outside, I might be afraid. But in the heaven court, even 10,000 calamities scythes would be useless. Gong Zizhua said calmly, If you were so confident, you wouldn't have agreed to my plan just now. Hearing this, the court master smiled awkwardly. Indeed, he was also afraid that Su Yu might have some hidden cards. That was why he didn't dare to attack him directly. Then let's follow Gong Zizhua's suggestion and give him a few more days to think about it. The court master said calmly, If he is smart enough, then as he wishes. If not, humph. With a sneer, the two of them walked back in a cave. Little did they know, where the soul power had just appeared, there was a trace of soul thread that was so weak that it could not be detected. It was at the level of Yuan. It was extremely secretive. The two of them didn't notice it at all. On a certain hill, Su Yu sat silently in a pavilion with his hands behind his back, looking at the magnificent mountains and rivers of the heaven court. His eyes were filled with a coldness that was as expected. If I were so easily deceived, I wouldn't have lived until now, Su Yu said calmly. He knew that Gong Zizhua was not a good person. As expected, what made the entire remnant domain hide in the Tao abyss? When Su Yu first heard it, he knew that it was most likely fake. If Gong Zizhua had the ability to bring the remnant domain into the Tao abyss, why would he let the heavenly court stay outside and take the risk? All right, as you wish, I will stay in the heavenly court to think about it for a few days. Suyu's lips curled into a cold smile. Since he felt that he was a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, then why was he still hesitating? Whoosh, in an instant, Suyu descended upon the 9th peak. Compared to the other mountains, ancient God Corpse Ancestors Mountain was extremely desolate. There were very few people stationed there. Many of the spirit herbs had already been dug out by others. In the main hall above, Zhang Fian was enthusiastically introducing to Yu Xiangwan. The hall you're looking at is where ancient God Corpse Ancestor cultivated in the past. Zhang Fian pointed at the hall. Yu Xiangwan's eyes scanned the crowd quickly. He turned a blind eye to the various luxuries and high-grade restrictions in the hall. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a screen in the courtyard. There were many ancient engravings on the screen, and they were faintly being worn away. "What is that?" Yu Xiangwan asked. Zhang Fian took a look and said, "That is the object that ancient God Corpse Ancestor used to practice calligraphy. There is nothing special about it." "Really?" Yu Xiangwan blinked his eyes lightly. He retracted his gaze without batting an eyelid and followed Zhang Fian to tour the ruins of ancient God Corpse Ancestor. Finally, the tour ended. Zhang Fian patted his shoulder and said, "Are you satisfied?" "Satisfied? Is this place for me to stay?" Yu Xiangwan was surprised. Zhang Fian nodded with a smile. "What else?" "You are the only descendant of the Corpse clan ancient god in the entire heavenly court." Yu Xiangwan was surprised and said, "Thank you, Deputy Courtmaster." Zhang Fian didn't mind. He pondered for a while and said, "Yu Xiangwan, it's like this. Anyone who joins the heavenly court will need to hand over the ancient god artifact in their hands to the heavenly court for safekeeping." "Hand over to you? How is that possible?" Yu Xiangwan's heart tightened. Seeing that he was nervous, Zhang Fian smiled and said, "Don't worry. We are not asking for it. We're just keeping it for the time being. If you need it, you can take it back and use it any time. This is also to ensure that the ancient god artifact will not be lost or stolen by someone with ulterior motives." "Is that so?" Yu Xiangwan still found it difficult to hand it over. "This is the most important thing of the ancient God Corpse Ancestor. How can I hand it over so easily? If you are not willing to hand it over, I'm afraid the heavenly court can't take you in. This great hall can't be left for you for the time being." Hearing that, Yu Xiangwan reconsidered. Should I hand it over or not? Right at that moment, a series of footsteps came. It was Suyu. "Brother Yu, did your ancestors warn you not to hand over the same artifact to others?" Suyu walked over quickly. He glanced at Zhang Fian from the corner of his eyes. He couldn't trust anyone in the heavenly court. When he saw that Zhang Fian was trying to trick Yu Xiangwan into handing over the underworld scepter, he knew something was wrong. Yu Xiangwan was reminded by Suyu's words. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, I think they said that I have to hold it for myself and not hand it over to others." The hope in Zhang Fian's eyes vanished instantly. He stared at Suyu coldly from the corner of his eyes, extremely annoyed. Seeing that Yu Xiangwan was about to waver, Suyu interrupted. "How hateful!" He said pleasantly, "You have to think about it carefully. If you don't hand it over, the heavenly court won't be able to help you." Yu Xiangwan shook her head firmly. "I dare not disobey the orders of my ancestors." Zhang Fian clenched his fists secretly. It's all Suyu's fault. He suppressed his anger and said, "Well, this is a serious matter. How about you think about it for a few more days?" "All right, let me think about it," Zhang Fian said. Zhang Fian cupped his fists. "Then for the next few days, you can stroll around the heavenly court. If you need anything, just look for me." He took out a communication jade and handed it to Yu Xiangwan. After receiving it, Zhang Fian left with a smile. But when she passed by Suyu, she gave him a cold stare. "Brother Su." Yu Xiangwan's smile faded immediately, and she said solemnly, "The people of the heavenly court don't have good intentions towards me." Suyu said impatiently, "You almost gave the underworld scepter to the heavenly court?" Yu Xiangwan said sheepishly, "That was just a moment of foolishness. Luckily you reminded me." After a pause, he said, "What should we do now? Should we run away quickly?" Suyu shook his head and said coldly, "You tricked us all the way here. Wouldn't we be at a disadvantage if we just leave like that?" Chapter 2751. Suyu smiled. You'll find out later. He looked at Yu Xiangwan, then at the screen. I see you're very interested in this screen. Yu Xiangwan nodded and immediately came to the screen. He caressed the words on the screen with his palm. I'm not interested, but there's something in the screen that makes me feel connected by blood. Oh, Suyu pondered and looked around to make sure no one was around. He bombarded the screen with a strength close to that of an underworld master, but the screen did not budge. Yu Xiangwan also exerted all her strength, even using the underworld scepter in an attempt to break the screen to see if there was anything inside. However, the screen was too hard, and they could not break it at all. Step back. Suyu simply took out the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. He placed both palms on it, causing the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron to spin rapidly. When it was red-hot like red iron, he slapped it away. Rumble. With a crisp sound, a crack finally appeared on the screen. Through the crack, an ancient blood-stained robe could be seen. What is this? Yu Xiangwan was dumbfounded. She really could not understand how such an evil thing could be inside the screen. Suyu continued to activate the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. After a dozen attempts, the screen was finally completely broken. The blood-stained robe inside was finally revealed. It was a kasaya inlaid with an unknown crystal. It was extremely tattered and stained with unknown bloodstains. The robe had been sealed in the screen for an unknown number of years, but there was no sign of decay. Yu Xiangwan reached out and picked it up. She smelled the slightly stinky odor and had a look of disgust. You spent so much time and effort to make this tattered thing for a monk. Suyu stared at it for a while, thought for a moment, and flicked his finger. The Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron struck it. An ordinary robe should have been smashed into pieces by the impact. However, the kasaya shook gently without any wind, and the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron was sent flying. Suyu was shocked. This defense is a bit strong. If you don't want it, give it to me. Before he could finish his sentence, Yu Xiangwan immediately draped it over her body and rolled her eyes at Suyu. I made it first, and you still want it? Suyu chuckled. Don't you think it's dirty? Besides, this robe should not be just for defense. He stared at the crystal with a thoughtful look on his face. His soul tried to enter one of the crystals. Immediately, an ice-cold aura entered his mind. An unfamiliar memory immediately appeared in his soul. My descendants, if you obtain the Heaven Shroud robe, please use it to immediately leave the heavenly court. Do not ever return. There was only this brief memory. However, the contents startled Suyu. Even ancient god corpse ancestor, who was born here, told his descendants not to come to the heavenly court. What was going on? Could there be something in the heavenly court that even ancient god corpse ancestor hated or feared? He tried to probe the other crystals, but to no avail. Those crystals required bloodlines to probe. Yu Xiangwan said, "Let me take a look." He easily sent his soul into different crystals, but his face was getting uglier and uglier. After a long while, he suddenly raised his head, his expression gloomy. He clenched his fists tightly. Brother Su, we've come to a wolf's den. The heavenly court is not the homeland of the ancient gods like we thought it was. This place is the ancient god graveyard. What? Although Suyu had expected this, the heavenly court was not the holy land he had imagined. However, he was still shocked by Yu Xiangwan's words. Graveyard of ancient gods. Most of the crystals contain secret inheritances left behind by ancient god corpse ancestor for his descendants. However, some of them reveal the events that happened during the first era of the heavenly court. Suyu's heart skipped a beat as he asked, "What happened in the heaven court?" Yu Xiangwan said solemnly. Ancient god corpse ancestor didn't elaborate, but he said that many ancient gods didn't die at the hands of the Son of Heaven or the ruler, but at the hands of the heavenly court. Suyu's heart shook fiercely. Speaking of which, the only person who knew that the Son of Heaven and an ancient god worked together to kill him was ancient god Nine Nether. No one knew how the other ancient gods had died. Hearing that they died in the heavenly court was unbelievable. What about ancient god corpse ancestor? Since he left behind a message, it means that he is not dead, right? Suyu asked. Yu Xiangwan nodded deeply. Yes, ancient god corpse ancestor left the heavenly court and hid in the Tao abyss. He only left behind the ether shroud to give us a chance to escape. So you gaze at the magnificent heavenly court, and a chill ran down his spine. What exactly happened back then? So many ancient gods had fallen here. Why did this place become the place where the ancient gods had fallen? Brother Su, what other plans do you have? Just say it, Yu Xiangwan said. Su Yu said seriously, like I said, I can't come here for nothing. Come with me. He and Yu Xiangwan flew up into the sky and looked down at the entire heavenly court. Moreover, he didn't shy away from displaying the yuan-level soul realm. Suddenly, a familiar soul fluctuation was reflected in his eyes. The Martial Way Temple. Su Yu's pupils shrank. You should have guessed that the mysterious force behind the Martial Way Temple was the heavenly court. If that was the case, those who were capturing the descendants of the ruler everywhere and extracting the blood of the ruler was not someone else, but the heavenly court? Oh, good. It turns out that you have been hiding it from me. Su Yu sneered. He stared at the Martial Way Temple. It was hidden very deep underground, and there was a restriction around it. The heavenly court thought that Su Yu couldn't find it. Little did they know that Su Yu's yuan-level soul realm was already powerful beyond their imagination. Let's go. Let's find something useful. Su Yu's eyes glanced around. After a while, his eyes twitched slightly and locked onto a palace hidden deep in the southeast. He sensed the auras of many descendants of the ruler. Most of them were the auras of death, fate, reincarnation, and creation. That was the place where they imprisoned the descendants of the ruler. Wait a moment. Yu Xiangwan unfolded the heavenly shroud and enveloped the two of them. Instantly, the auras of the two of them disappeared. Even if it was right in front of them, the heavenly court master wouldn't be able to detect it. After all, this was a treasure left by the corpse ancestor ancient god. With this help, Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan quietly came to the outside of the palace. At this moment, two people walked out from inside. They talked as they walked. Try to speed up the process. We will succeed soon. Unfortunately, we only have the blood of the 4 great domains. We still need the 8 great bloodlines. While opening the door, Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan slipped in calmly. What they saw was hell on earth. Hundreds of descendants of the ruler were chained to the pillars. Their meridians were all pulled out, and the blood of the ruler in their blood was squeezed out. Some of the descendants of the ruler were already dead. The rest were all half dead. The whole palace was filled with the stench of decay and blood. It was nauseating. Occasionally, some of the descendants of the ruler could be heard screaming in fear. Chapter 2752. Yu Xiangwan was disgusted. Maybe I understand why ancient god corpse ancestor left the heaven court. Some of the methods of the heaven court were too sinister. It was not difficult to extract the bloodline of the ruler. There was no need to treat them in such a cruel way. However, the heaven court chose to do so in order to extract a little more of the bloodline of the ruler. From this, one could see how vicious he was. Perhaps ancient god corpse ancestor did not want to be associated with such a person, so he left in anger. Let's save people first, Su Yu said lightly. He stepped forward to save a descendant of the Death Master. It was a petite girl with dark eyes, which was a sign of a pure descendant of the Death Master. She hugged her arms and squatted on the ground, shivering. Her eyes were full of horror. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. He wasn't even very clear anymore, and he kept repeating similar words intermittently. Su Yu comforted her softly and turned to save more people. In the end, all the disabled people were gathered together. If you still trust me, enter this cavern world, and I will let you out when it is safe. If not, please leave now. Hearing this, the people who were still conscious nodded. This place was already purgatory on earth. Even if Su Yu had evil intentions, how evil could he be? In the end, hundreds of descendants of the ruler were all rescued. Yu Xiangwan said with deep emotion, Brother Su, you used to think of yourself as a descendant of the ancient gods, but now you are saving the descendants of your mortal enemy. Do you find it ironic? Su Yu was silent. How could it not be ironic? This scene was something he had never imagined. He thought that one day, as a descendant of the ancient gods, he would fight against the descendants of the ruler. But so far, he had only had a fierce battle with Xiao Hao. He had no contact with the rest of the people. He even had a period of interaction with the heavenly palace of the time domain. Suyu sighed in his heart and said, "Search the scene." The two people just said that they have created 4 kinds of ruler's bloodline. The two searched the hall for a while. However, they only found fragments of the ruler's bloodline, which was very rare. Something is wrong, Suyu thought, and used the Yuan level soul realm to explore the surroundings. To his surprise, he discovered that there was a secret underground chamber beneath the palace. At this time, Yu Xiangwan also found something. "Look here." Yu Xiangwan stood in front of a stone box protruding from the ground. There were more than a dozen powerful seals on the stone box, each of which was at the level of a heavenly Tao Lord. Yu Xiangwan tried to undo the seal, but with his strength, he could not move the seal at all. So Yu walked over. After studying it for a moment, he said in a serious voice, "This is the seal of the energy source." It was recorded in the Tome of Darkness. The Chi Source seal was a powerful seal that used the words of the heavenly tomes as a carrier. It greatly consumed the soul energy of the person who sealed it. If it wasn't necessary, no one would risk harming themselves to seal others. It could be seen that the person under the seal was definitely not an ordinary person. Who could be sealed inside? Yu Xiangwan was surprised. Suyu placed his palm on the energy source seal and said, "Won't you know once you take a look? The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Since the person inside could be specially sealed by the heavenly court, it could be seen that he was definitely a great enemy of the heavenly court. Crack. Suyu used the words of the heavenly book and deftly unlocked the seal. Just like that, the stone box opened on its own, revealing a revolving spatial entrance. The two of them looked at each other and jumped in. Suddenly, he discovered that he was in a colorful void. For corpses floated in the void, spinning in circles. All of them exuded a terrifying aura, especially the power of the domain, which was exceptionally strong. The 4 masters of death, fate, reincarnation, and creation. Suyu was surprised. When Suyu rushed over, the domain of the 4 masters had already been destroyed. He had no idea where their original bodies had gone. Unexpectedly, the corpses were all captured by the heavenly court. Brother Su, they all died of torture. Yu Xiangwan's eyes were glowing with a faint blue light as she saw the cause of death of the 2 masters. Oh! Suyu walked over to examine them and found that there were injuries on their bodies. It seemed that he was still wrong about one thing. The 4 masters did not die at the end of their lives. Instead, they were captured alive by the heavenly court and then killed. Is the master of the heavenly court so powerful? Suyu murmured. Killing the masters, Suyu thought that using the sacred mortal body should not be a problem. But to capture them alive, especially 4 of them, was too difficult. Let's see if their bloodlines are still there. Suyu's gaze swept over them, and he was surprised to find that the bloodline in their bodies was completely intact, and all of it was left in their bodies. That's strange. The heavenly court did not take away the bloodlines? Suyu was extremely surprised. They were all dead, and the bloodlines of the masters remained in their bodies, which would only weaken. Why did the heavenly court not take them back sooner? Brother Su, there are a few more corpses over there. Suddenly, Yu Xiangwan, with her keen sense of smell as a member of the corpse clan, immediately detected something unusual. Suyu looked up. Wasn't that right? There was a pile of corpses lying in the distance. The 2 of them walked over to check and found that all of them were from the heavenly court. There were more than 30 of them. All of them had died horribly. It was as if they had been brutally killed by some horrible existence. Creak. A soft sound came from the pile of corpses. Suyu and Yu Xiangwan were immediately on guard. Who is it? Yu Xiangwan waved the underworld scepter in her hand and separated all the corpses. A young girl hiding in the pile of corpses was revealed. She was about 19 years old and was dressed in bright red. She was holding a flower in her hands and lying on the ground, shivering. There were obvious wounds on her body. On her chest, she was wearing a symbol of the heavenly court. "Don't kill me, Death Master, don't kill me." The young girl kept screaming as if she was extremely terrified. Death Master? Suyu's pupil shrank. Among the remaining 4 masters, the most mysterious one was the Death Master. He was the only master that Su Yu was not sure he could kill. After all, he was in control of death. It would not be easy to kill him. This made Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan's hair stand on end. They immediately looked back at the body of the Death Master. That body was just a corpse. Su Yu asked, "Death Master, have you seen him before?" The young girl in red said in panic, "He is not dead. He can come back to life at any time. Please take me away. I beg you, take me away quickly." It seemed to be responding to his words. In the enclosed space of nothingness, a gust of cold wind blew. It sent chills down their spines. It was as if there was a cold thing behind their necks, blowing on their necks. But when they looked back, there was no one there. "Brother Su, something seems strange." Yu Xiangwan swallowed hard. Chapter 2753. Swoosh. His soul immediately entered the girl's soul. What he saw was an extremely strange scene. These people were from the Heaven Court, and they were extracting the blood of the four masters. But suddenly, the Death Master, who was already dead, suddenly sat up. Then he started a massacre. One of the deputy court masters of the Heaven Court was the first to be swallowed by the Death Master and eaten alive. The rest were hunted down by the Death Master. In the end, the other Vice Hall Master managed to escape by relying on an extremely powerful artifact and sealed the stone box completely. Those who stayed behind were all killed by the Death Master's corpse. The red-clothed young lady before him had relied on her unique ability to feign death to barely escape this calamity. She had been hiding in the pile of corpses for half a year, until Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan arrived. Seeing this scene, Su Yu felt a chill run down his spine. He finally understood why there was such a powerful seal on the stone box. The person who used the seal was willing to hurt his own soul to seal this place. That was because the Death Master was like a ghost. Unbeknownst to them, they had trespassed into this extremely dangerous area. "Let's go quickly," Su Yu said immediately. This place was not suitable for them to stay for long. However, when he turned around, what made his hair stand on end was the Death Master, who was clearly dead, actually sat up. A pair of tightly shut eyes opened slowly, revealing a pair of inky black eyes. There was a hint of mockery and cruelty in his eyes. Yet another reckless fellow has barged in. The corners of the chief sovereign of Death's lips curled upwards, revealing a cold, evil smile. Yu Xiangwan's heart was thumping wildly. "Brother Su, let's go quickly." Swoosh, swoosh. Su did not dare to hesitate at all. He immediately fled toward the entrance. Yu Xiangwan followed closely behind. How would the girl in red dare to stay when she saw the entrance open again? The three of them sped toward the entrance. However, just as they reached the entrance, a cold voice rang in the ears of the three people at the same time. "Since you are here, why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Creak, creak. The crisp sound of bones rubbing against each other resounded in the void. Su Yu and the others turned their heads and felt their scalps go numb. The Death Master's body swayed as he stood up. An astonishing death chi rushed out of his body and turned into a pitch-black demonic palm that grabbed at him. In the blink of an eye, Su Yu immediately dashed out. But before he left, he didn't forget about the bodies of the other three sovereigns. He teleported through space and snatched the bodies of the three sovereigns into his hands. Only then did he leave. Yu Xiangwan followed closely behind, followed by the girl in red. Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan arrived outside the stone box. He was about to leave. Half of the girl's body emerged from the entrance. Just as she was about to struggle free, a pitch-black demonic palm suddenly appeared from the vortex, grabbed the girl's upper body, and dragged her back. "Save me!" The girl let out a heart-wrenching scream and stretched out her hands for help. Su Yu hesitated for a moment before grabbing his hand and using the space domain to shatter the demonic palm. Only then was the young girl finally saved. She was so frightened that her beautiful face turned pale and she wailed loudly. Yu Xiangwan stared at her. "Brother Su, why did you save her?" "A burden." She was a member of the Heavenly Court, and she had personally witnessed Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan breaking into the secret grounds of the Heavenly Court. Who knew if she would tell on them? Su Yu looked at the girl. "What's your name?" "Hong Yao." "Hong Yao." Su Yu's brows twitched slightly. Why did this name sound so familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before? He pondered for a moment, but couldn't find the source of the name, so he didn't care. Well, since you were a member of the heavenly court and saw what we did, I should have killed you. But I'll give you a chance to live. So you clench his fist. Four seals formed by yuan-level domains appeared in his palm. Swallow it. Hong Yao hesitated. What is this? Something that could destroy you immediately, Suyu said calmly. Hong Yao wasn't stupid. She immediately understood that this was a seal to control her disobedience. If she had any intentions of betrayal, she could be killed immediately. Hong Yao pursed her red lips and had no choice but to swallow the seal. Seeing this, Suyu's expression softened. Follow us from now on. Don't leave our sight without my orders. Okay, Hong Yao said hurriedly. Suyu nodded. He looked at the empty hall, waved his sleeves, and activated a real thought. Using the yuan-level domain to activate a real thought, its power was unimaginable. All the descendants of the Dominators were transformed. Not only were they realistic, but they could also exist for a long time, even longer than a month. For the people of the Heavenly Court, unless their souls were comparable to the Soul Dominators, no one could see through them. Let's go to the next place. Suyu and Yu Xiangwan left the hall. They then appeared at the edge of the battleship to study the special liquid. It was because of this liquid that such a huge defense could be built. If he could get his hands on this liquid, he could also turn the remnant domain into an imperishable domain, which could withstand the destruction of the era. Such behavior naturally attracted the attention of the Heavenly Court. Not long after, Zhang Fian led a group of strong men, rushing over angrily. Holy Body Su, what are you doing here? Zhang Fian berated. She disliked Suyu no matter how she looked at him. Suyu studied the liquid openly, not taking Zhang Fian seriously at all. He said indifferently, Why do you care? Zhang Fian was furious. Holy Body Su, I advise you not to go too far. This is the Heavenly Court. Suyu looked at him and said, And then? What can you do to me? The court master and Gongzi Zhua were waiting for him to give them the divine nine-dragon cauldron. What would Zhang Fian dare to do to Suyu? If he ran away, it would not be as easy to get the divine nine-dragon cauldron. Zhang Fian squinted his eyes and warned, Holy Body Su, before I call you a holy body, you'd better restrain yourself. You should know that a fallen phoenix is inferior to a chicken. Don't you know how weak you are now? After a long period of observation, he was sure that Suyu had lost the power of the holy body. Naturally, he did not care about him. Suyu said disapprovingly, I think I'm quite good, and I'm quite strong. Do you want to weigh me? Zhang Fian snorted angrily. Ridiculous. He could not do anything to Suyu, so he could only stare at him. All of you, keep an eye on him. If he does anything unusual, inform me immediately, Zhang Fian scolded. The strong men who had led them here immediately surrounded Suyu. They would not let him go even for a moment. Suyu carefully studied the special liquid as if there was no one else around. After a long time, he finally had an idea. It should have been brought back from the Tao Abyss. It is similar to the pulse, cleansing, divine marrow of the heavenly palace. Suyu's eyes shone. He did not know if there was any extra liquid in the heavenly court. Chapter 2754. If there was, he would try his best to get it and use it in his remnant domain. Brother Su, let's leave this place. Yu Xiangwan looked around at the spies who were watching them with ill intentions. The seal seemed to be very important to them. Suyu had finished his research, so there was no point in staying. He nodded and said, Let's go. However, he kept thinking about the source of the special liquid. When the Heaven Court set up such a huge formation, it was impossible that there was no special liquid left. Moreover, the seal would be damaged sooner or later, so it needed to be repaired. The Heaven Court must have considered this, right? Then, there must be a backup of the special liquid. Hong Yao looked up, hesitated, and lowered her head again. Say what you want to say. I didn't ask you to be a mute. Suyu's voice came in her ears. Hong Yao said hurriedly, If you want the raw material for the defensive formation, I might know where to find them. Huh? Suyu looked at Hong Yao in surprise. How did you know? The special liquid was extremely important. How did Hong Yao, an ordinary member of the Heaven Court, know about it? Hong Yao shrank her neck and said, I overheard a dead deputy master talking about it. There was indeed a deputy master who was killed by the death master under the stone box. That was a reasonable reason. Where is it? Su Yu asked. Hong Yao looked at the spies and said in a low voice, Master, follow me. Under her guidance, Su Yu and the others came to a familiar place. It was familiar because Su Yu had found the Martial Path Temple not long ago. It's here. It is said that there is a deputy master guarding this place, Hong Yao said. Deputy master? Su Yu's eyes flashed. Is that deputy master called the Martial Path Temple? Hong Yao was surprised. Master, do you know him? Know him? More than know him. Her eyes were filled with a murderous aura. He had forced Han Xin to die, so he must take revenge? However, he planned to do it when he left the Heaven Court. Once he fell out with the Martial Path Temple, he would become the enemy of the Heaven Court. Now is not the time. There were many things in the Heaven Court that he had never heard of. Okay, let me confirm it again. Su Yu looked away. He couldn't just listen to Hong Yao's words. It would be best to check it out. At this moment, several figures appeared on a mountain not far away from them. Their bodies had faint flickering turtle patterns. Regardless of gender, their skin was extremely rough. A descendant of ancient god Gold Profound? Su Yu recognized it. Your Excellency is Su Sheng Ti, the descendant of the corpse race's ancient god who has just returned. Used descendant, right? The leader was a rough and strong man. His voice was like a stone that fiercely smashed into people's hearts. Su Yu looked at him and calmly asked, You are? The burly man laughed heartily. I am Jin Haotian. I would like to invite the two of you who have traveled a long way to visit my ancient god Jin Xian's old haunt. Su Yu's heart moved. Actually, the place he wanted to go the most was the old haunt of ancient god Nine Nether. He wanted to see if he could find a piece of the heavenly shroud left behind by an ancient god like Xiang Wan. But ancient god Gold Profound's old home was also fine. He wielded ancient god Gold Profound's inheritance sacred weapon, the Golden Xuanwu. If the Golden Xuanwu was sentient, it should be able to help Su Yu find something useful. Of course, he was not using it for himself. He was leaving it for the Heartless Iron Hunter. The Heartless Iron Hunter's life would perish. That was what Lu Zhu had said. Her life would only perish temporarily, and she would be reborn in another way. One day, they would meet again. He just didn't know where she was now. What do the two of you think? Jin Haotian invited. Su Yu revealed a faint smile. Then, I shall accept your invitation. Haha, Su Shang Ti's presence is the honor of the ancient god Gold Profound's old haunt. Please. Under his lead, Su Yu, Xiang Wan, and Hong Yao descended on the mountain. Inside the mountain, there was an enormous stone tortoise statue. The turtle looked exactly like the Golden Xuanwu. They sat on the mountain peak near the Golden Xuanwu. There was already a table of delicacies prepared. Please, Jin Haotian said with a smile. The two of you have come from afar. You must be tired from the journey, right? Have a taste of this wine. He took out a bottle of yellowish wine with a half smile and poured a cup for each of them. Xiang Wan looked over and immediately frowned. The wine contained a trace of the ancient god Gold Profound's power. It was only suitable for the descendants of the ancient god Gold Profound. If other creatures were to drink it by mistake, they might be gradually petrified by the power of the ancient god Gold Profound. This wasn't a toast. It was clearly a malicious challenge. Why? Are the two of you complaining that the ancient god Gold Profound's old haunt is not good enough? Jin Haotian said with a half smile. Xiang Wan's face darkened. She knew that the so-called invitation was not friendly. It was probably arranged by Zhang Fian. She wanted the descendants of the ancient god Gold Profound to cause trouble for Su Yu and the others, so that they wouldn't have to wander around blindly. He was about to speak, but Su Yu had already drained the wine without any expression. The yellowish wine was poisoned. Immediately, a strong petrifying power appeared and began to corrode Su Yu's body. However, the power spread. It was absorbed by the Golden Xuanwu that Su Yu was secretly holding. Su Yu put down the wine cup and said lightly, It's just SOSO. It doesn't taste good. Jin Haotian was shocked and looked at Su Yu in disbelief. Nothing happened to him after drinking this wine? How strange. Impressive, impressive. Jean Haugen applauded. Your courage alone is worthy of the praise of the descendants of the ancient god gold profound. In order to express my respect for you, I have specially given you a gift. Jean Haugen crushed a jade pendant. All of a sudden, the giant Xuanwu began to move. Below the Xuanwu, there were many people bound by chains, struggling to move it. Those people were exuding a strong aura of death. It was the corpse clan. Xiang Wan's eyes turned cold. Was this deliberately done for her to see? Rumble. The giant Xuanwu kept turning and finally left. In the place where it had been, there was a lake. In the lake, black shadows could be vaguely seen, scurrying over at an extremely fast speed. The backs of the black shadows were exposed from time to time. Their backs were covered with barbs and looked extremely hideous. It was obvious that they were quite ferocious creatures. At this time, several descendants of the ancient god gold profound came to the side of the lake. Each of them was holding a chain in their hands, and on the other end of the chain was a corpse clan member. Holy Sue, you must have never tasted the Abyss Beast, right? Jean Haugen smiled mysteriously. Abyss Beast? He really didn't know what the Abyss Beast was. The Abyss Beast is a wild beast that lives in the Tao Abyss. The spiritual meat on its body is an excellent supplement. Eating half a pound of it can increase one's cultivation by a level. Jean Haugen looked at Suyu. For a peak Xian Pathmaster like you, if you're lucky enough to eat a king-level Abyss Beast, breaking through to the Pathmaster level would be a cinch, Jean Haugen said. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 2755. His cultivation had indeed fallen too far behind. Ever since he had woken up, his cultivation had broken through to the peak of Xiandao Lord, and there had been no further progress. Most importantly, the 8-star civilizations had been destroyed and their resources had been exhausted. It was almost impossible to find any resources that could help them break through to the Tunnel Master level. So what if there was a chance to break through now? I'll get someone to fish one first and let Sage Su have a taste of it. Under Jean Haugen's order, a descendant of ancient god gold profound waved his massive chain and threw the corpse race being on the other end into the pool. All of a sudden, in the water, a black shadow sped over and swallowed the corpse race. The descendant of the ancient god shouted and pulled the chain. The huge fish hook on the corpse's body pierced through the black shadow's lower jaw. Feeling the pain, the shadow immediately fled into the water. Puff! The chains rattled as they were pulled, as if they were going to snap at any moment. Soon, the chain was straightened. He pulled the descendants of the ancient gods on the shore into the water. The ancient god's descendant laughed out loud, and an unparalleled power burst forth from his body. With a forceful tug, the huge black shadow that had sunk into the water was pulled out of the water once more. Then, he used all his strength to pull the black shadow out of the water and threw it toward the peak of the mountain. What great strength! Yu Xiangwan was secretly surprised. This was probably the bloodline power of the descendants of ancient god gold profound. Jean Haugen didn't even think about it as he casually grabbed the black shadow and caught it. It was a ferocious fish that was 100 feet long. It struggled with all its might, its mouth full of sharp teeth as it tried to attack Jean Haugen. Jean Haugen chuckled and pressed the fish's neck onto the table. With a smack, the fish was squashed to death. Suyu squinted his eyes. Such power was probably at the level of a master of the heavenly law. It was extremely terrifying. None of the leaders of the descendants of ancient god gold mystic were simple. Holy Sue, eat it while it's fresh. Jean Haugen picked up his knife and fork, sliced off the flesh of the Abyss Beast, and gave it to Su Yu and Yu Xiangwan. Su Yu picked up a piece and tasted it. Compared to its ferocious appearance, the taste of the Abyss Beast was surprisingly sweet. Moreover, it contained an exceptionally special power. That power felt like the meridian cleansing divine marrow. Once it entered his body, it immediately cleansed his cultivation. Suyu was still fine, as he had already reached the peak of the Xiandao Master Realm. With just this little bit of power, he wouldn't be able to achieve a breakthrough. However, after Yu Xiangwan took a bite, she actually showed signs of a breakthrough. When he ate an entire 500 grams, it was really as Jean Haujin said, and he directly broke through a realm. Jean Haujin stared at Suyu with a smile on his face. Holy Su, do you want to try and fish out the Beast King yourself? Suyu stared at the black shadows in the pool. Abyss Beast King. Ing Jie couldn't be referring to these, right? These are just ordinary Abyss Beasts. The Abyss Beast King is hiding at the bottom of the pool. We need the best bait to lure it out, said Jean Haujin. Suyu had long felt that Jean Haujin would not give him benefits for no reason. Now, the fox's tail should be revealed soon. The Profundity Beast King is only interested in special bloodlines, Jean Haujin said. For example, my ancient god Gold Profound bloodline, or your sovereign bloodline. Suyu's expression was calm as he asked, So, you intend to make me the bait? Why? Holy Su, are you afraid? Jean Haujin tried to provoke him. Suyu calmly said, Let's just say so. He did not know the abilities of the Beast King, and he was asking him to use his own life as bait. Did he look easy to trick? Jean Haujin's provocation was useless. He stood up and said, Why don't we have a competition? Let's see who can fish out the Beast King. What do you think? Suyu calmly said, So what if I win? So what if I lose? If you win, I will give you the Beast King. What if I lose? Suyu's eyes flashed as he asked, If I lose, please let me play with the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron. What do you think? He wanted to trade the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron for the Divine Nine-Dragon Cauldron? Jean Haujin's calculations were quite good. Your offer is too light, Suyu said. Jean Haujin's gaze deepened as he removed a pendant from his neck. It was a crystal. A scroll was sealed within the crystal. The scroll of ancient god Gold Profound controlling the holy artifact. What do you think? Jean Haujin asked. Suyu's eyes flashed. The heartless Iron Caesar had the bloodline and the holy artifact, but he did not have the complete method to control it. He was at a disadvantage. This item was what he needed the most. Sure, Suyu said. He would not lose anyway. Great. Jean Haujin slapped the table. Let's begin. The two of them flashed to the side of the pool. Jean Haujin bit his finger, causing it to bleed. Streams of ancient god Gold Profound blood flowed from it. When the blood dripped into the pool, the black shadows immediately gathered, becoming extremely frenzied and ferocious. They were even tearing at each other. At the same time, the entire pool trembled involuntarily. A huge ripple spread out. A dark gaze could be seen from the depths of the pool. Suyu's heart skipped a beat. It should be the Abyss Beast King. Judging from its aura, it was at least at the early stage of the Heavenly Law Master level. I'll make a move first. Jean Haujin jumped into the pool, diving towards the bottom of the pool. Suyu leaped as well. He did not press down on his finger. He had 4 types of the bloodline of the Master. If he released them, the Beast King would definitely be attracted. That would be too much of a bully and too dangerous. He might as well follow behind Jean Haujin and see what was going on. As soon as he entered the water, Suyu felt an extremely evil energy staring at him coldly. His soul eyes immediately probed outwards. He could clearly see the bottom of the pool, which was invisible to the naked eye. He could clearly see a gigantic beast, which was almost 1/10 the size of the pond, swimming slowly towards Suyu. As for Jean Haujin, he did not go to hunt the Beast King. Instead, he hid first, secretly waiting for the Beast King and Suyu to kill each other. Then he would reap the benefits. It's no wonder that you jumped down in such a hurry. It turns out that you were waiting here. Suyu chuckled in surprise. Feeling the Beast King approaching him, his lips curled into a mocking smile. I'm afraid you won't even have the chance to be the fisherman. He did not retreat. Instead, he advanced, rapidly approaching the Beast King. Sensing Suyu's approach, the Beast King saw it as a challenge. It let out a deafening roar, causing the water in the pool to tumble violently. All of a sudden, just as the two were about to collide, Suyu's space domain suddenly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was in front of Jean Haujin. Jean Haujin, who was hiding in the dark, immediately sensed that something was wrong. He hurriedly came out of his hiding place. But the Beast King had already sensed Jean Haujin's presence and charged over. Suyu smiled faintly, then used the space domain to leave. This time, the Beast King only noticed Jean Hougen. Coupled with the remnants of the ancient god's blood on his body, it crazily attacked him. Jean Hougen's expression changed slightly, and he immediately dodged.